Well, greetings, everybody, and welcome to the Inworld review. It is New Year's Eve, and we thought, well, we've really got to come back before the new year. Do the usual thing of having a look around at what's happened and what is coming up. Now, we have been away for a few weeks. For those of you who don't know, we were very busy doing mini Inworld reviews at conferences. About 3 weeks ago, we had the Open Sim Community Conference, and about 2 weeks ago, we had, my lips aren't moving. Oh, and they weren't, were they? How very odd. Oh, it must have been the relog. Oh, that's it. I forgot to lip flap at the relog. We're a bit late today too. We've been having a few problems getting people in, basically. So anyway, it is New Year's Eve. We also had the Hypergrid International Expo a couple of weeks ago. We did a sort of mini Inworld review from there, the lunch break, the halftime show, as they called it at the Super Bowl. We did our version of that, which is a mini Inworld review. And we also had a Hypergrid panel, and Thirza Ember had a presentation, and a whole lot more besides at the OCC. So we haven't been idle. We've been on air, so to speak, but with the holidays and everything else, we've been a bit quiet since. Anyway, all is now back to normal. This show, we're going to do a bit of reflection and stuff like that, and then we'll be whooping it up again come the new year next week. Right, let me introduce the folks who are here with us today. Firstly, on my right, we have Sun Tzu, sometimes known as Jerry Obama. I'm not sure which I will call him, so I'll say hi, Sun. Welcome.
Hi, Sun. Yeah, Sun's fine. Basically, I went with Sun Tzu because of my work with the military, and I had made an AI agent on him. But Joey Obama was my first work avatar and work for the Joint Forces Command. So
okay.
That's why I've basically adopted the Sun Tzu both in Science Base and Open Simulator.
Yeah, so Sun's the best ID to use. Yeah, and it's a very odd thing. It's rather unique for an American uniform. Sorry, what you're wearing?
Hey, it's a lot better than the sailor outfit I wore for so many years. So
yeah, right, a bit of variety. Okay, next to Sun, of course, is James Atloud, who's multitasking on our camera system here too. So welcome, James.
Hi, Mal. I'm happy I can be here today and have my audio working, which is it's been a day, I'll tell you.
Well, I tell you, and I must admit, I had you offline when we were doing news earlier, and whatever microphone you're using now is like very soft, soothing tones.
Oh, okay.
So it's very good.
It's old school. It's analog. Go figure.
Nothing beats analog, does it really?
No.
Okay, to my other side, my left, as it were. Next to me is none other than Thirza Ember. She was my co-conspirator on the Hypergrid Expo, and of course it runs the Hypergrid Safari every week and does a whole lot more besides. The list is too long to mention, really, I think. So welcome, Thirza.
Hello, Mal. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And next to Thirza, we have another superstar of the metaverse realms or whatever. It's neither than John Lester, who you probably know better as Pathfinder Lester. So welcome, Pathfinder.
It's good to be here.
Absolutely great. And technically, we have another person with us. So she's actually on the line in Skype, but muted at the moment because we somehow the Hypergrid doesn't like her to get today. But we're hoping she will show up as we're going along, and that's no other than Lobo. But we'll say hello to her when she actually arrives, if she does, which I hope she will. And I also chosen everybody today basically because it's New Year's Eve. This is a sort of not quite the normal show. It's more of a, well, it's not quite a party either, but you get the idea. Have a look back at what's happened over the year, including the two conferences we've had recently to end the year on, and maybe get a little bit of a flavour about what might be in store for us coming up in the year coming. And actually, there is one thing I would like to tackle first, even though Leah isn't actually with us yet. and that is that after the OpenSim community conference, or rather the very beginning of it, there was a panel which is a traditional opening panel featuring the developers of OpenSim. And for the first time ever, I actually found the developers seem to be addressing issues to do with the viewer. They're normally concerned with the back-end code and everything else like that, but it was very odd to actually hear a developers panel concluding that we really, really do need our own viewer. Because often, they're more interested in getting actually the grids up and running than the way people actually have viewers and use them. So do you I'm going to just throw this open to everybody here, but do you think this is a sign of change in terms of developers maybe wanting to pay more attention to the viewer and maybe putting feelers out for what you might call a hypergrid viewer, a metaverse viewer? Any thoughts from anybody? Or is that certainly the wrong question?
Well, I could say I think it's kind of hard to make a viewer, and I think you need a lot of, one person alone cannot do it. You need a manager for the project, somebody that is user oriented and can also manage the various people who are doing the code. And I think it's a tough job. There are so many other projects of other kinds of worlds that people are working on. So I don't know. I wonder.
Very good question.
A lot of this too gets to the point of how things have changed a bit as we branched off from Second Life, and you have different needs for each community. So as we're just trying to tag along and keep something that satisfies both masters, that doesn't always work. Eventually you're going to get to a stage in the fork development where you can't coexist on the same platform using that exact same viewer as your entry point. And I think we heard it a little bit too at the conference where people were talking about trying to monetize their work from Open Simulator. The early days was a little bit easier. Now it's getting a little bit tougher for some. So, is the viewer an impediment to that? Do we need to have a viewer that's more dedicated to Open Simulator and that only shows the things that are working? Because when you show to a client and they say, well, what does that button or what does that menu do? And it doesn't work. It's kind of hard for you to explain that away, at least in a platform where you want to be able to do it and continue to have that customer for business.
It's funny, obviously Crystal Lopez has customized a version of Singularity, the on-look viewer, which doesn't really look any different from Singularity unless you happen to go to a grid where they're implementing command server side that restrict what that viewer can see. But nonetheless, although it makes it very simple to go to something and it's, you've got simple menus and everything else like that for doing specific things, nonetheless, it is based on Singularity, which of course in turn is based on the same legacy code that Firestorm, Alchemy and all the others use, which contains components from Linden Lab, who are the people behind Second Life, albeit a corporate walled garden. And something that was in the news near the end of the year last week is that Linden Lab, for the purposes of their Second Life platform, are actually moving all their servers into Amazon's cloud. And there is talk of them maybe doing the thing that Kitely do on OpenSim, which is regions will sort of enter an idle state when they're not in use. And if you actually log in and want to go to an idle region, you will possibly get that sort of delay while they put you in a holding area while the region is booting up, which... It's a small thing, but it affects the idea of a continuity of sort of, a flat Earth that never ends. It's always expanding out, The suggestion that, now it might be momentary, but there will be kind of holes in that expanded terrain. And I have heard that the third-party viewers, as Linda now calls us, like Firestorm and Black Dragon and various others that are principally used to go as alternatives in Second Life, some of those viewers may well have to change, just in the way they did when Linden's introduced aspects of the what do we call it, a Havoc engine into the viewer side. And at the moment, something like Firestorm, of course, has an OpenSim variant. But if the code base changes an awful lot with the move to the cloud and stuff like that, the question is being raised is, well, will these third-party viewers still work with OpenSim as they increasingly change for what is still probably their biggest audience, which is Second Life users? So thoughts on that? Then we'll look at the optimistic stuff. Has anybody got any thoughts on that? No.
Well, the one thing I wondered about was with OnLook Viewer in particular, why it didn't roll out more. Like, I think Krista was the only one that was doing work on it with her work at Irvine.
Yeah.
I don't know why it didn't go past that, but I'm a little bit curious if anybody knows anything on that as far as or what could be done to help the development of the OnLook Viewer, because it sounded like it had a lot of potential, but it just didn't meet the light of day for some reason other than Krista's work.
I don't think it was different enough from just a regular Singular. We all tried it. We did a safari over there, and I just don't think it was different enough to just a normal Singularity viewer. It didn't have any particular features apart from you couldn't see yourself, which for most people using it is not a particularly useful feature.
Yeah.
So
when I used it, it didn't stop me from seeing myself. I saw my own
but you
avatar.
have the option to not see your avatar.
Okay.
The
major option.
The main thing about OnLook is that it is basically Singularity. There is no difference except that Krista has devised a method by which individual grids or regions can switch off viewer elements when you enter.
Yeah.
So if they don't want you to build, they can say it's a no build region, but they can also hide all the build tools so you don't not even tempted.
Or also hide the elements that don't work.
Yeah.
You can have something that's functional.
Yeah. And in OnLook, you can actually have a choice of whether you see your own avatar or whether you don't see your own avatar. Obviously, if you don't render your own avatar, then it's fast and furious. But basically, all you can do is move forward, walk around, and take a seat. And the first times I used the OnLook Viewer, there was a slight problem, and that is the teleporting out facility had also been disabled, so you were stuck there. Unless
I think that's the question is like, what's special about OnLook? And in a nutshell, the idea is that it behaves more like a web browser, in Krista's own words, in that the UI is programmable server side, right? But so you think, that means if I land on like Mal's grid or something, suddenly my whole UI will become this unique, beautiful, custom skinned thing. And actually, no. The way it exists now is basically can turn on and off existing features in the UI. Which so when you start using it, you're like, okay, so it's just like Singularity, except that now I can't teleport, or now I can't build. So because we're used to everything on, right? We're used to everything always on. So it's only taking things away. So I think it's a bit of I think the potential for having highly customizable UIs server side, the same way when you go to web pages and you go to websites, each website looks different and unique and is perfectly tuned to the experience. But the way it exists, at least right now, the OnLook Viewer is really just, being able to disable parts of the UI that people are already used to seeing no matter where they go, and I think that's
good for new people or something. But
maybe, exactly. Yeah, maybe
if you're experienced in OpenSim, you want everything to work. You don't want just,
Yeah.
I think.
It depends on your application, because, like, for example, if you're a teacher, you may not want them to be able to teleport out. You may not want them to do certain things that are part of the stock viewer. So having that configurable by a teacher on a website, as opposed to having to be a grid admin and know how to do all this stuff on the other side, is a lot easier.
Then the problem is that the people who are the teachers, they don't know how to fix up a viewer, so they're not working on it.
Exactly. It's got to be something somebody provides, a bit like does the Outworlds install, where it's a package where you provide an easy console to configure the OnLook Viewer for your particular use. But the main failing, I think, with the OnLook Viewer well, it's a default without worlds, actually, if you want it. But to me, is that the server-side commands that allow you to hide things from the interface in the unlocked viewer don't work in other viewers. So if you use the normal singularity to go to the same place, you can see the build button, even if the grid doesn't want you to. So, the on-off switching is only interpreted by the unlocked viewer itself. So anybody with a bit of savvy, who's told to download the unlocked viewer to go to their classroom, that is fine. But as soon as they realize they can download another viewer and play havoc in the classroom,
unless you could on the grid side be able to tell it to detect what kind of viewer they're using, and then have certain rules based on that.
You could just have the rules, couldn't you?
Well, no, actually, that is something that did occur to me. In fact, I think it was one of my unspoken questions at one of the panels recently, is that when we log in, even back in the days in Second Life, you can actually, the system knows what viewer you're using. You could even have a tag above your head showing your user, your user agent. So it should be possible for a grid to actually run a thing that disallows any user agent other than their preferred one.
Yeah.
So they could get around that. But let's move on, because
could I just ask something from something Path just mentioned? Pathfinder, I don't know if you remember, but there used to be one out of Japan, I believe it was, that they had a server-side technology that could deliver things onto websites and modules. I remember they had like you could have like your inventory window, or you could have the 3D view in World. You could take portions and kind of split it up on your web pages. Do you remember that one at all?
Vaguely, yeah.
Because that sounds a lot like what you were talking about, which in a lot of ways I think that makes a lot of sense for the future, because eventually where I think this is really going to make a difference is once you get the WWWC actually involved as part of the virtual world solution, and virtual worlds are part of the discussion of the browser development, that's when you're really going to get things to change. Right now, we're just like an add-in. We're not part of it, or we're a separate viewer that's not part of the web itself directly.
Okay. Now, while we're on viewers here, I mean, I vaguely remember that too, but not in any detail. But I do know that in our discussions on this program and elsewhere, we have, and I know Krista agrees with this, though. I think it would cost about $50,000 just to the work involved, where you quite literally take the world as it is, nothing wrong with the graphics or anything like that, but you build an interface that is totally modular. So it uses a plug-in system, pretty much like many pieces of desktop software do. You've got plug-in filters in Photoshop, or you've got they're called plugins. But whilst you, Joey, as you said when you were introducing yourself, Sun is in Sciencebase. I know you from there, as well as in OpenSim here too. You're in Second Life, no doubt, as like everybody else, still sometimes, even if it is once a year. Are you in High Fidelity too? I think you are, aren't you, Sun?
Yeah, I'm in High Fidelity as well, Sansar.
Because one of the reasons I thought to bring you on the show as well is that, the metaverse, as we refer to it, is not all, my preferred base, if you like, is OpenSim, or particularly, the killer app to me in OpenSim is the hypergrid. And Sciencebase and High Fidelity, for example, are two platforms that are entering the space we're in. High Fidelity, of course, is founded by Philip Rosedale, who indeed back in the day founded Linden Lab and Second Life. And Sciencebase, oddly enough, their CEO is one of the founders of OpenSim. So there is a tangible connection here. There aren't that many similarities between Sciencebase and High Fidelity, in the sense High Fidelity is tending to, and I'm not including Linden Lab Sansar here yet because it's pretty disgraceful in my opinion, but compared with Sciencebase, that is, although similar in many respects. But these are they are virtual worlds, but they don't subscribe to the concept we have of a map. High Fidelity is a bit similar to OpenSim in the sense that you actually have your own sandbox region that can either be in the cloud or hosted on your own computer. And OpenSim, of course, for example, this region here is hosted on my own computer, although for public events with audiences, I would go to, a cloud-hosted server or, an online server. Sciencebase takes it a bit differently because there is no real component that's on your own hard disk, except, of course, that it's built with Unity. So the authoring environment you build with is actually on your hard disk and then gets uploaded to Sciencebase servers. But trying to be impartial, and I'll start with you, Joey, trying to be impartial. You have these distinctive things here. Linden Lab Sansar I will mention because it seems to be like a bit of a poor man's copy of Sciencebase. But of course, Linden's being Linden, so they want to control the whole damn thing. So instead of working with Unity or a common platform, they built their own, biting off more than they could chew almost. I've often asked questions about interoperability, but how do you think these other platforms are shaping up in as, if you like, competitors or viable alternatives to something like OpenSim? And also, what do you think the future of interoperability between them is, and possibly between them and OpenSim? I mean, they are very different platforms. The communication channels could probably be opened up between them, but the things like physics engines and the way everything is, you can just hypergrid into Sciencebase. But do you see anything happening, especially in the coming year, of course, but just in the future, that might help harmonize those different areas?
Well, those are key concerns that I've had, as have a number of others in the past. I mean, I think starting back in like maybe 2008, 2009 timeframe, I was working with the IEEE inside of Second Life. In fact, I helped set up the Artificial Intelligence Learning Center there. We had taken a look at it, and some thought it was too early to do it, but we did gain some ground. But I'm not exactly sure where things are at as far as tracking at this point. But I've always thought that interoperability is a strong consideration. I mean, it's not necessarily that we all need to look alike. We don't want every virtual world to be exactly the same. But there are certain things that it would help to have best practices and things that we learn from one another, and that for certain types of applications we can integrate. So that's why we were looking at the terms of interoperability. Two of the reasons why we started up the Sciencebase, in particular, Adam Frisby was saying, was first off to have better interoperability, and secondly to have better accessibility. Like for example, we were talking just before the show a little bit about teachers. When you're teaching a class, you might have some people that can, use a desktop app. Some need to use it through a web browser, or some need to use it on an iPad or an iPhone or Android tablet, or somebody might have a VR headset. So having something that's accessible through a multitude of different devices, and where you can actually communicate back and forth through text chat, through voice over IP. You want to have those things to be able to hear the stream if there's a music event or something taking place, regardless of which platform you're on, regardless of which device, a viewer that you're using. So it's an important consideration. But then also, I think the metaverse of the future is going to be one that's going to be able to tie multiple worlds together for different types of things. It's not going to be one platform. It's not going to be one world. There's going to be a multitude of worlds. And having those multitude of worlds so that they can work with each other at times is an important aspect as well. And that's one that we've been trying to pursue as well. We have, in fact, we just had our Winter Festival in Sciencebase yesterday. And one of the things I did there was I hosted a quiz show where it was about things with the holidays and things like that. And it's a quiz show we put together called Elephant in the Room. And You know, kind of gives away the gag at the end when somebody gets things wrong. You know what the elephant's going to do to you. But
Yeah.
but with that, we'd love to, you know, find an opportunity to work with another virtual world and host this between worlds, because I really think that that's an important aspect, is not just doing things inside of your own little sandbox, your own walled garden, as you put it, with some of these, you know, having a thing where we can reach out between worlds. Because I mean, it's kind of like what Second Life did for us. If you take a look back and you think, why was Second Life such a big deal, like back 2007, 2008? A lot of it was because you had people from all different types of professions, all different cultures, all different parts of the world, with all different kinds of ideologies, all different kinds of thoughts, approaches to things, coming together in one place and learning from each other.
That's nice, because that's what Caledonia Hightower is doing with the Shanahi Library. They do that. They have readings that are on Kitely, but at the same time they're happening in Second Life and even in Inworlds. And they make it so that the people on the 3 different grids can communicate with each other or see each other, so that they can be aware of each other.
That's
and
great.
They're all hearing the same readings. That's a nice idea.
One thought I had was, I'm hoping Adam is going to build a studio still for us over in Science Space, but and I personally am not very good with Unity, but I think conceptually, even though I don't think I'm the one to do it. I had this idea of, we're also getting this with what they're calling web worlds now, where you can take content from an open sim, say a build of some sort, like a TV studio, and you can export it in usually a DAE variant format, a mesh, and then you can import it onto a website with Cyber Lounge Web Worlds, or you can import the same thing, as you do a lot, Joey, into Science Space. Right? And I was beginning to think, well, let's say I've built a television set, right? A stage set is what I mean, for those of you who think I'm talking about making toy televisions. Would it at some point, I think, be, you know, the interoperability thing? Could it be that I could have this programs set, for example, looking pretty much identical and saved in a place on the web, saved in Science Space and saved here, where it is, of course, and within the construct, right, arrange the intercommunication so that, for example, the voice within the construct will communicate across different platforms. The chat will communicate across platforms. Maybe even some elements of scripting could be mimicked, because if something was offered, for example, in JavaScript, which is very common, although there's plenty of variants these days, there might be a way of building an interpreter that would allow scripts like that to run in, say, Open Simulator, so you could have certain elements that are common to all these platforms working independently as plugins in the exported build itself. We're not talking about mimicking 2 different grids. We're talking about putting something in situ in all these different platforms that has built-in communication tools within it. So the Hypergrid Safari, for example, could go to a venue on the Hypergrid and actually meet, and there will be a duplicate venue on the web, a duplicate venue in Science Space, and they could meet with the people in the 3 different platforms, opening up all that communication, even though they're not in the same physical virtual space.
Or it could even be the same exact mesh. That's one thing I've wondered about. And I've seen some approaches with that in the past, using resources on live between different virtual worlds at the same time. So like you're talking about your TV studio, having a TV studio, but it's also people could come in through different virtual worlds and they'd all be using that same item right off the internet, not duplicates, but live the same item. So that way, dynamically, if things change to the item during the show, it would also change in each of those environments.
Oh, but that would be even better, because that way you're becoming one sort of connected platform of a sort. I was just thinking of it, the inside of the build of the studio doing that. But I mean, if you could have interactive changing elements that are the same in all, that's fascinating. This would appeal to you, Path, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And you, of course, have done work in Unity too, as well as level design over here. So there are kind of parallels there. Okay, let's get away from that for a minute. We haven't got an end of the show, but we have got a whole year coming up in which we can discuss these more furiously. I know Thirza has some limited time here, so I'm going to switch to Thirza next. In particular, for a little bit of Hypergrid news, Hypergrid Safari. Let's start with the Safari. You've generously provided me with some pictures that I have on the right-hand screen up here. I'm just going to click the home button. And we'll start from the beginning. Now, I mentioned earlier, or actually I didn't mention it on this show, but you've just published 2 calendars for the next year. And the first one we're seeing is the cover of Men of Open Sim.
Men of Open Sim, yeah. And they all are.
Forgetting the guy in February who seems to be sinking rapidly underwater, and I hope that's not. I hope that's not a metaphor for real life. I am sinking rapidly. So tell us about it. What drove you to do these calendars? And well, we can't actually show you the individual pages. You're going to have to buy one in World and pin it up for that. But this is the cover. That people can buy these in real life too, can't they? They can.
Yeah, if they want to. Sometimes it's nice just to have something you can touch in real world. So there's a paper version available, but you can pick these up. They're free, obviously, and full permissions. They're at the Safari House, just right in the first part of the Safari Market, and so it's in a box. And what I've done is I've included all the landmarks to all the places that are in the calendar, so you can go and visit the places as well, not just have the calendar on the wall. And the calendar has quite a few sort of normal public holidays like Christmas and Easter and that kind of thing. But also I tried to include many of the anniversaries of OpenSim. So you'll see Pathlandia Day, and you'll see Nook Day, and you'll see the Open OS Grid and Franco Grid and Metropolis and so forth, the different birthdays as they come around. I think the first one coming up is Craft, which is the 27th of January. So they have a big party that day. So you can kind of keep up with it. And very kind people like Pathfinder who very kindly went back and looked when they created their grids. And so we've had this, and this is our 3rd year. So we, instead of just making one, I made 2. I made one for the guys and one for the girls. So there's a little bit of eye candy for everybody.
Okay, I'll go move on to the one for the girls so you can see the cover of that one too.
Yes, Zinnia Frenzy at the Lodi concert hall, where they often have very wonderful concerts. And there she is in a ball gown on the front.
Wonderful stuff. Nice camera angle too. From the looking up into this.
I'm going online right now, ordering the print version on Lulu.
But I'm
going to get one of each, men and women.
It's just that some people just like to have something tangible.
It's awesome. It's awesome. I mean, I've always...
don't feel you have to.
No, I know. I mean, and you're very. I think it's fantastic to have the in-world version, which I always have in my cabin on Pathlandia. But I'd love to have in the physical world one this past year.
It's an added touch. I might again. Pathlandia Day, love it. When's that?
When is it now? Well, I'll have to consult my calendar.
I wonder which calendar she's using.
So is that the day? Is that the day when I set it up? When I started?
That's when you set it up. Also, Krista told me the first day she tried out hypergridding for herself, and there's also the hypergridding day when they jumped from Second Life to that IBM region.
Oh, that's right, the IBM.
So they're all on it. Yeah, they're all on the calendar, as well as like more useful things like Easter. It just adds a little touch, you know. It's a little sort of
indeed.
thing.
In case anybody watching thinks, oh, they're talking about a whole year. We're actually talking about a whole decade here, aren't we?
It's playing Science Space. I don't know when that started, or I'd have put that date in. Maybe that's for next time.
Yeah, I'll give that to you.
Sure.
That's great. For those who aren't familiar with Safari, and I can't believe everybody watching the show isn't by now, we tell you about it every week. But if you hypergrid over to francogrid.org, whatever its sport is, then you want to go to the region. There's a region called HG Safari, and that's where you'll find the clubhouse with the booths and stuff that Thirza was talking about. Although I'm quite sure those booths will appear in other places before long.
Yeah,
they always
drop them out here and there. They should all be full copy, full permissions.
Yeah, absolutely great. So let me move on from that. If there you have the memories of last year, but a living calendar for this year. And as we said, you know, you can get a paper copy to hang on your real organic wall.
And I tried to keep it, you know, respectable, so you can hang it anywhere. Nobody's going to be shocked.
I'm going to come back.
Although Miss June.
Yeah. Well, I don't care. I love it. I'll come back to the HIE that we ran a couple of weeks ago in a moment. But I mean, certainly in the case of the French, you know, I had to make choices about do I want the censored version or the uncensored version? And believe me, the uncensored version was more than enough.
Good education, I heard.
Leave a little to the imagination, right?
No.
Yeah, I was shown the choices, and I thought, you know, well, I don't want to, you know, YouTube to censor the replay, or you know. And
I passed that responsibility onto Mal. Was that wrong of me?
No, it's quite right, and quite frankly, you know, everything with the so-called censored version got everything across. In fact, I actually found the uncensored ones a bit crude, not because of what they graphically display, but for, you know, the mismatch in the tonal range.
We don't want to know any more than that, Mal.
Yeah. It actually looks, how should I say, it looks a bit amateur rather than censored version. So, and I'm a strong believer in not wanting to promote or push anything that denigrates OpenSim in any way.
Yes,
you know, we're about promoting it, and you know,
exactly, and promoting the wonderful places, and really that's the point of the calendar. There's a couple of shots that are like on Safari region, because with the conferences, I didn't have a huge amount of time to do them, but most of them are people in places that they built. For example, this is Zinnia. The building behind her is it's a landmark building on her grid, which is Third Rock grid, and I think it was a kind of a team job, because the actual original build was then meshed by Elderval Lamantone. So it's just every building sort of has a significance in sort of the realm of OpenSim and hypergridding, because they're all places that people love to go. So
yeah. Sure, great. Well, I'm going to move on with the pictures. The pictures coming up are actually a sneak preview of where the Safari is heading this coming Wednesday at noon Pacific time. So let's start with this one.
This is one of two. This is Sand. It's this thing that Art Blue did. It was in Second Life for a while, I think. Anyway, I have no idea, except that it'll be very good, and there's a lot of particles, and it's very poetic. And so it's got these like golden angels, and then there's particles happen, and it's all very mystical. And I'm sure he'll have a really good explanation, which I probably won't totally follow.
Okay,
that's the joy of it, really.
It looks lovely. I mean, I'm used to many visits to arts installations.
No, this is a new thing for us.
And a lot of them tend to be, I don't know the word for it, abstract or a bit wild. Whereas this looks much more in the kind of grounded, shall we say.
And wait till you see the particles. I couldn't bring you the GIF I made, but it's quite outstanding.
Say, Mal.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I just excuse me. I just wanted to report that in the YouTube chat, someone's saying, "Where is the uncensored French?"
Wouldn't you love to know?
We can't tell you that.
If you go to our channel and look at the replays of the presentations in French and figure out who's speaking principally, and I'll send where they are, you might find out.
Yes.
But I'm not saying anything else. That will keep her occupied for a while, won't it? Yeah, exactly. Okay, next shot. I don't know whether this is sand again.
Yes.
It's a different
angle because there's these incredible, like, wonderful cog things that are glowing, and then when you stand there, then all these particle things happen. And I know there's a whole story about the Libyan deserts. That's all I can tell you. You have to come on Wednesday to know what I'm talking about, because I don't know what I'm talking about. So.
Well, who cares? It looks lovely. Right, now, talking of looking lovely, I know what's coming next, because I'm not biased in any way, but I absolutely adore what Karima Hosan does. And I love her mix of machinima with poetry and her style of building. And this is one of hers. Yes,
it is. And this is actually our first destination on Wednesday. It's a big art safari. So this is the funerary boat, I think. Anyway, you'll find out if you come. And if you watch the machinima that was made by Karima with Natasha Rand, of course, a great camera girl and editor, and so this is just one part of it. The wonderful thing is you can watch the video, you can watch the machinima, and then you can go and actually be part of the journey. And Karima will be there, of course, to welcome us. And this is on Kitely. And there's another shot, I think, a nighttime shot of a different part.
Right. I have just interrupted myself there because I have sent a teleport to Leah.
That's wonderful.
Arrive. Okay, let's go to the final shot in this.
There it is. Yes, this is this wonderful fairy castle, and there's elephants and peacocks, and so it's going to be wonderful. And she'll be there to guide us through, and with her beautiful voice, of course, there's the poem that goes with it, and then you get to experience the place. And then if you haven't seen the video before, you can watch it again and sort of recontextualize the whole thing with yourself in the frame. So it's very nice. It's going to be fun.
Just imagine that elephant could have been in Science Space on their show as well. In another time, place, and world.
I got to say goodbye to you guys. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Mel. Thank you for all you've done this year. It's been a great year.
Thank you. Well, it's sad to see you go, but it won't be for long. I'll be seeing you within days, I'm quite sure. Okay, well, thank you very much for being here, Thirza. And I'd also like to welcome the Lobo at long last. We've got her here, including a steampunk hat, and she's in a different costume once.
Hey, thanks, Mel. Happy New Year, everyone.
And to you.
Could Lear move here?
Yeah, I was just going to say you could take over Thurza's vacated seat, actually, for the camera. There we are. And yes, so we can continue. Wonderful. Okay, so if Thurza didn't make that clear, Hyperghost Safari happens on Wednesdays every week at 12 noon Pacific time, which I guess is 3 p.m. in the East Coast, 8 p.m. in the UK here, and 9 p.m. in Central Europe. So sort of time that many people can actually get to. Looking at those Art Blue and Karima Hosan pictures, great art-filled journey in store this coming Wednesday, as indeed most Wednesdays throughout the last year, and probably every Wednesday coming up. Right, now sadly, of course, Thurza did have to leave us before I got to tackle HIE, the Hypergrid International Expo, which but I and Thurza were principally the people that sort of had this idea of wanting to do something a bit more international, which actually meant, broadcasting sessions in foreign languages. And so we did a sort of beta, although actually we've now been calling it alpha conference to see how it went. And it went well enough that we're pretty certainly going to do the next one. And maybe that will be the actual beta in the spring. You were there, Leah, as were you, Pathfinder, and you were there. Well, no, you were sort of on standby as a camera, weren't you, son? So I don't think you were actually there, but James was obviously there. Thoughts on that? I'll start with you, Leah, to welcome you into the conversation.
Hey, thanks. You're talking about the Open Simulator Community Conference, right?
No, actually, I'm talking about the one that followed, the
Oh, the
HR.
Hypergrid International Expo.
Yeah, but
That
I
one?
will come back to OSCC now you're here anyway.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, that was fantastic. I tell you, now I know what it feels like to try to translate 4 or 5 languages and try to monitor all of them at the same time through the text chats. That was a breathtaking amount of information, wonderful perspectives, cultural orientations, research, education, you name it. I had a blast. And of course, I was tweeting some of it, so you'll see some of my photos out on Twitter. I have others I still need to tweet, but it was amazing. What a great conference.
Yeah, and well, we did a lunchtime show on both days. Both you were on that, and Pathfinder was on the Saturday one with us too. James was filming it too. So, and we had, of course, Heike there with us, who was the one person there who actually spoke all the necessary languages. So she was able to come on the show and say, well, what we just heard was this. You didn't understand it, but I did. And then we were able, in English at least, to sort of review what had been happening a bit. And yeah, as you say, it's near impossible to describe because all the spoken languages at the conference had their own group, and all the chat was in that group, and each group was provided with a translation of what was going on. So as you say, you couldn't follow 5 different groups in 5 different languages, but
yeah, to that point, Hiker noticed that the first day she wasn't in any of those groups, so she was just translating for herself, right? And the second day she said, how are you guys in those groups? And she whispered to me, so I said, look at my profile and join them all, okay? Yeah. And she did. And she says, oh my gosh, what an amazing experience. Even though and I don't think she translates all those languages, but I think she does 3 of them, right? Yeah. And so she was like, oh, that is wild to see all the different perspectives, who was picking up on certain thoughts. And of course, some of the speakers had provided scripts or chat scripts so to help the transcribers, so the transcription was a little easier to navigate. But in other cases, these were live transcriptions, and that's just amazing to do that between, for example, Thirza translated, she was posting in 3 different chat channels at one point. That is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, she wasn't even the official translator, but she's good Italian, English, and French, I think. Yeah, and it's just great to see because, the Hypergrid and obviously other platforms too that we conceive of being part of a future metaverse, this is like the web, but we're talking about not pages, but spaces. 3D spaces that span the whole globe and are just a click away, hopefully, a long click maybe, but a click away, and this the whole thing here was, in some cases we were able to play music in the gaps, that was local music to say France, Italy, whatever. And you got the atmosphere of the different cultures that they were all at the expo, but in a sense they conveyed the fact that we're sort of like visiting their region, be it France, Spain, or whatever. And that is very much like going to a foreign webpage. Obviously, you can hit Google Translate these days, but it's a similar thing where that vast interconnected space is not just about the Western world that speaks English. It's about all sorts of other language and whole different cultural experiences too. A classic example, without going into detail, is the instance of the uncensored French. The uncensored version would have been completely normal for them, but we were just, we thought we'd modified a bit to be a bit more internationally acceptable. But, if you actually go to France, the real country, with your organic body, you are immersing yourself in a different culture, which goes by different rules, traditions, and everything else. So I think something that we really achieved there was bringing that feel of those different cultures into, one space, which had a bit of an English component too, to make it accessible.
See, and that was a very interesting session. I know what you're talking about. What he's referring to, for those of you who weren't seeing it, and you can see it. Are those recordings online, by the way?
Oh yes, yep. They're all
that's what I thought.
They're all on Metworld or the Malbones channel here. So
that's right. That's right. So the slides were going a little faster because some of them were uncensored, as we're saying, right? And so they were very frank looks at power. No, I'm being tasteful.
No. I was just saying they weren't. It wasn't a necessity. The reason they were going faster is because they have far too many slides to get.
They did have a lot of content, and I was trying to snap it as fast as possible with snag it.
Some of it didn't even have time to res, as we call it, appear on screen.
Right.
They click the next button, but well, it's their fault. Too many slides.
But it was very interesting content, and it was talking about the human condition, whether you're handicapped, whether you're, fully mobile, whether you have certain affordances, whether you're, stuck at home, whatever, and then all the different kinds of interfaces. And I won't describe all of them, but but lots of different ways of experiencing and interacting with others. And that's the part that I found really fascinating. It was thinking about the human condition and some very breathtaking research that I think we often don't give equal time to, and probably should, because they're making some breakthroughs in some of those technologies. So that's what I found fascinating about the conference is you were touching on subjects that are sometimes very sensitive to people, right?
Yeah.
And yet they're very important. Let's say I was a quadriplegic, or and I was fairly confined, and yet still had the desire to interact in different kinds of ways. I would certainly be very interested in some of this research, and to see what kind of affordances might be possible for me. I know I've had friends who were like that. I had a friend who was a player killer in one of the game systems. He was the #1 player killer, and he came to one of the game conferences, and they wheeled him in, and here he is laying on his face, using his mouth for an interface to interact, and he's playing better than any of us with our hands, right? And of course, we're thinking, "Whoa, that's really good."
I went with a friend of mine to visit. It was probably 10 years ago or more now. It was outside London, halfway to Brighton or something, and it was just like, well, it wasn't a shed, but it was like a group of little houses, and it was a base for foot and mouth artists. Do Christmas cards, obviously, but other greeting cards, and to actually see people, with a canvas and board and paints in front of them, and they were doing it all with a brush between their toes, or others were doing it entirely with their mouths because they had limbs missing, and astonishing to see what some people can do with their limited
absolutely
ability. And to bring that in world is just wonderful.
Yeah. I think sometimes we forget that these virtual worlds, these communities, are comprised of so many different kinds of people with different experiences. And that's what's really breathtaking, is how we provide these kinds of affordances for everyone. And so that, I think your conference, the Hypergrid International Expo, brought that to light with some diverse content that I hadn't seen before. And you have to realize I've been to a lot of conferences. I just did number 246.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so
you find the time, man.
Yeah.
There's something new at everyone.
Well, it's just wonderful. But anyway, Pathfinder, now you weren't there the morning that the French did their session, although you may have been watching on the stream, because I know you had a variety of things going on. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I missed it, but I'm like, what the hell are they talking about here?
Do you really want to know? I could say the word.
Mel doesn't have slides for this part.
It's involving hardware, new kinds of
Yes,
hardware.
it is.
Yeah.
Yes, and also sensuality. So we're not just thinking about practical matters. We're also thinking about emotional and physical, and also and I know a lot of people say, "Oh, that's all that crude stuff." I says, "That's all that life stuff."
Well, the thing is, it's interesting because I spent most of my formative years working in healthcare and specifically working in neuroscience and neurology, and so that means you are working with a lot of, I was on the research side of things, but I also, I interacted with colleagues and working with patients, and then we're dealing with people who have different paralysis issues, right? And sometimes it's a sudden onset from an injury, or sometimes it's a slow, gradual loss of mobility, and not just mobility, but just the ability to interact with the world and people physically in that world. People dealing with ALS, people dealing with degenerative diseases, people dealing with multiple sclerosis, which are sort of a slow sapping of your ability to physically interact with the world. And some of these people, they deal with it for a great part of their lives. And to, it's funny because a lot of the times the conversations would come around to, I want to have physical interactions with people. I want to be able to touch them and maybe, have romantic encounters with people. How do I satisfy myself in those ways? And, people are physical beings. No matter how much we want to pretend that we can just plug into the matrix and just sort of live in our heads, people are physical beings. And when everyone here, for the most part, you walk away from your screen and you have full interactive capabilities with the physical world. But for a lot of people, when they leave the screen, they don't. And the ability to use technology to facilitate enriching physical experiences for people is something that I would see across the board with all of these patients who are dealing with all kinds of physical mobility issues and things like that. So doesn't surprise me at all. It's not like, there are some weird people who want to play with, connected devices and things like that. And then it's actually, and I'm thinking, before I was even involved in any of this stuff, before Second Life even existed, before all of this stuff, I remember having, going to the Spalding Rehab Center where you had people who were dealing with, loss of mobility and loss of ability to physically interact with the world and with the people in that world and the people they loved in that world. And the conversation would and the patients would bring it up, and they'd be like, "I don't know how to bring this up, but are there ways I could have some kind of a meaningful physical relationship with anybody at this point? Because it's killing me not being able to do it, and my life has changed, but my brain, my mind, and my desires are completely the same." Yeah. So I'm really glad. I'm so glad that happened. I'm so I'm like, damn, I missed it. But it's like man, it's just so awesome that was brought up, because it's such an important thing, in my opinion.
I think a lot of it too is not just on the sexual side, but also just we have a need to touch people, and to feel that what we're doing in that environment actually has meaning and brings meaning to others. And a simple thing like in relationships, being able to reach out and touch somebody's hand. That can make such a powerful statement beyond any sexual activity. Yes. And it's the same kind of thing that they're in a world where, a lot of cases, people that are limited in what they can do in the physical world. So they want to be able to feel that they still have meaning and value in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really good that you brought up the touching too, because that's the last thing I want to say, is that it's not just the sexual side of things. It's just knowing that with my mind, I want to initiate just physically touching someone on the shoulder, and knowing that I made that happen, and then having someone do that to me. And it doesn't matter at some point. It doesn't matter if you're using your hand or not, because the technology can be this intermediator, and your brain fills in the gaps. And again, I saw it with people with physical disabilities, with people with artificial limbs. It was amazing when people had artificial limbs, and they're like, "Oh my God, I can actually hug someone again because I have arms." And it's like, they're not real, they're not physical, they're not biological harms, but the technology fades away and it becomes a real experience. So that's all. I'm done.
I have to say actually that it drove me up the wall until Philip or Chris gave me some kind of quick key that allowed me to do it. But one of the real novelties in high fidelity, which you'll know about, Joey, son, is of course that to make friends, basically, you meant to be in a headset and shake hands. And, you know, I was having a hell of a time trying to make friends in high fidelity because I wasn't wearing the kit that allowed me to physically shake hands with them.
You can do that now in the desktop mode, too, by the way. They found a way around it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it's, you know, it might seem trivial, but, you know, the idea that tactile, you know, aspect of the interface, you know, does make such a difference because, you know, you actually move your arm out, as it were, to do that handshake. And, you know, there's no real, you don't actually sort of feel the total sensory contact, but you're kind of halfway there. And, you know, we cover on the news and occasionally talk on this show about, you know, what's happening in VR. But I'm not so much, I don't want to know about every headset that's coming out, but, you know, every month or two, there'll be some significant, you know, change in the haptic side of things. On the news I recorded earlier today, there was a company who've they brought their it's like one of those insulated jackets you take out, to a bit like the one I'm wearing on stage here, but made of, you know, like duvet type material. But basically it's a haptic jacket. They slashed the price from, you know, down to $300 now, which are down from over $600 or even $1,000 for business. So they're making it much more affordable. And then we get other companies that are bringing out different kind of gloves. And then you've got other systems that like Leap Motion that actually have sensors. You don't need to wear anything. You just need to be in proximity. Even types of cameras that do all this sort of thing. So we're coming, you know, a lot more, you know, into that future where there'll be, you know, we've got the content and the systems in place from Second Life through to OpenSim, plus the new, you know, Science Spaces and high fidelities. But, you know, watching that virtuality tech, I don't imagine a future where I'm going to be completely cut off from hearing the real world, seeing the real world, except for maybe 5 minutes or something. It actually makes me nervous not having the contact with the real world. But these things that will open opportunities. Maybe I will never wear a headset, but I will have enough sensors or a glove or something that allows me to do these things. And I don't know what happened to them, but I don't know if it was this year or last year. It seems a long while ago, but one of our news items was about a company in Australia who were making, well, it was smart underwear, basically. And so long as you're on Wi-Fi, then, you know, a man on one side of the planet could communicate with a female, maybe, on the other side of the planet. And, you know, it had vibrating sort of stuff or something that made you feel a bit like the wristband you can buy, which buzz you when your iPhone's ringing. They can sense over Bluetooth and give you a tactile nose. So you get a buzz on your wrist. It's not a buzzing noise, it's a throb on your vein that tells you your phone's ringing. So we're entering a whole area here, really, where we're going to be these extensions to the VR helmets and everything else. You know, that greater world of tactile communication is going to be available electronically. And of course, that comes back to your discussion about, you know, lesser enabled people, you know, gaining, missing enablements, you know, through all this stuff.
It's interesting, too, what you were saying just a minute ago, too, Mal. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Ready Player One, which is about to come out, I believe.
Yeah.
You know, there they talk about, you know, there's no other place to go but, you know, that into the virtual world, you know. It's like it's, you know, what if we get to that point in society where virtuality is the place to go to escape from everything that's happening around us that we're not empowered to do anything to change, you know.
I rather hate the totality of that concept, especially when I see.
I know it's dystopian.
Yeah. Well, talking about dystopia, I mean, my real dread is that somebody like Facebook, who almost own the world already, will somehow leapfrog everything with their spaces and stuff, and suddenly, like the Oasis of Ready Player One will be the Facebook. I mean, you'll be. They'll be controlling it, and that is very dystopian to me. I mean, the technology itself, not so much, but I can see a world, overcrowded world. A movie I'm a big fan of is I think it's one of the best movies ever made, a science fiction movie called The Fifth Element.
Oh yeah, awesome.
And the Bruce Willis character, he drives a cab for a living. But I mean, he lives in a cubicle that, is barely 6 foot by 6 foot or something, and it adapts to whatever he's doing at a given point in time. His deliveries come in through a window, his taxi cab flies up to the window to collect him when he's off on doing his job, and,
even his food flies up.
Yeah, and it's like, like Amazon are doing with drone deliveries and things, it's some kind of future world where everything is made easy, but we kind of, we're all in these sort of isolated cubicles. In some ways, it's kind of romantic, but in other ways, it's very unnerving. And, Pathfinder made a very good point here about we're physical beings and we need that human contact. Now, if you can have a glove that allows you to feel a person's hand at the other side of the world, that is very much bordering on a human contact. That is where these kind of things are incredible, open up incredible opportunities.
See, now, Mal, some of the research in that, in 95, when I was studying VR for my doctoral degree, I looked at studies. And of course, they were coming out of the adult community where they were looking at how to synthesize touch in the sense of having channels that would fill with air. So you'd feel this pressure if you had a glove on or a bodysuit or whatnot. And then also to flood them with water and make them cold or hot. So you got the sense of warmth and then, of course, of coolness. So you could synthesize all kinds of different haptics, right? Different ways of feeling. And of course, that was 95. And of course, my first thought was, I don't know if I want anything that's electrified and filled with water on my body.
It could be a shocking experience, yeah.
Yeah, because ironically, I'll let you know the secret here. The thing I want most of this new tech at the moment, right, is I burn a lot of aromatherapy oils and things, natural things to give me atmospheres and stuff that go with music or whatever. And what I'm looking forward to is to they already make like an aromatherapy kit where it's like a printer, a 3D printer or a paper printer. You actually get the little cartridges, certain scents, and you can then tell the device to mix these vital cartridges into different mixtures that give you different scents. And you can literally command this device to, it's like having an Amazon Alexa and saying, Alexa, give me, a musky swamp. But I'm looking forward to the point where that can be coded in with a virtual environment because, at the moment I have a virtual environment I can see, I can hear sounds in it. So I've got all sorts of input. But the idea that I could actually electronically mix and fuse smells and actually walk into an environment that triggered the right smell for that environment. I mean, I'm going to be wonderfully happy when that comes along.
There are some issues with that. We did some testing. This was a long time ago, 20 years ago. And the one problem with smells like that is once you have a smell, changing to the new smell and getting rid of the old smell, that's really hard in the lab. So I don't know how it is with your machine. I do have some aromatherapy stuff too, but I don't have a machine to program that. That's interesting.
No, neither do I. That's on my wish list.
Okay.
They are making them apparently, so it's on my wish list. But no, I know what you mean. I mean, if I fill the apartment with lavender, for example, are good for helping you sleep, for example. You can't wake up in a room that smells deliriously of lavender and makes you want to go back to sleep. You can't instantly change it to a real vital get up and go scent, but these things linger. They linger, but they don't necessarily linger that long. You sort of get a transference from one kind of aroma to another. But yeah, you're quite right. You can't just wipe out a smell, delete the smell, and replace it with another one. That would be a domestic cleaner's dream, wouldn't it?
One thing I found interesting though with the smells is I was reading up about dogs and how they actually see the world through their nose. How they smell things out. Like, for example, if you're cooking a meal, they will actually smell the components separately. Whereas us, we're more dumbed down in our sensory for smell that we smell it combined. But also some people, depending on their disposition, they might smell more like the dog does or more like the average human does. It just all depends. So it can have different effects at levels on different people.
I think it's, cats are like that too, to a great extent. Yeah. I think it's levels of perception, really. If you're attuned to a particular level of perception and you're focused on smell, then you will detect subtleties in it. But, if you're attuned to something else, you'll just smell the composite, So, and we all run around, like headless chickens half the time, and we don't focus on the subtle innuendos there. We maybe have no cause to, but I think... there's a lot of things like that. Actually, I think aromatic oils and things are a good case in point, or even women's perfumes. The alcohol-laden things. They're all subtly blended, and some people can detect the subtleties in the mix, whereas other people they just get the composite smell, and they think of it as that scent. Rather than, that kind of combination of orange and wood. It's, I don't know. It's just different people, how finely their senses are attuned, I think. But anyway, the big future for VR, I think, whether it ends up being dystopian or utilitarian, I don't really know. My personal thought is that there are too many almost monopolistic players. Too many, it's actually half a dozen, and between them they seem to buy up anything going.
Speaking of which, what are your thoughts? Just curious, what are your thoughts when it comes to places like Amazon getting into the virtual worlds market?
Well, they've released Lumberyard, and then of course there's this new one for building with. It does seem to me that they've got an eye for it. In fact, Amazon is a marketing company. It sells things, right? So they, free or not, there's probably a price in there somewhere if it's only to ingratiate themselves with an audience so they become indispensable.
But they do better with industry than Second Life did because they're that type of a company.
Yeah, exactly. They are pioneering tools, and the tools that they monetize down the line remain to be seen. But I haven't been seeing signs of Amazon take it. They have it. Even when you go to Amazon store online, it's not 3D or anything. It's just a boring old website. I haven't seen any creative aspirations there. Something fundamental, which isn't really as good as they say it is, like, the Alexa things, you still can't train it to recognize my voice properly or whatever. The Google one's much better on that front. I don't know, I don't know how it goes. I don't think Amazon are likely to. Well, I don't know. They might.
Yeah, the thing I like with the Google one is I like semantics better. If you ask it a question, it tries to give you a answer instead of sending you 100 boxes to go look at.
Okay, if you're quiet, everybody. This is something I know. I'm British, right? And my Google is British. But you're about to hear something that everybody in America thinks is hilarious. Hey, Google, are you connected? I don't know if you caught that.
It's not high enough, yeah.
It was real faint.
Yeah, I think... hey, Google, turn your volume up loud. Hey, Google, are you connected? I don't know. Basically, she says the fact we're having a chin wag would suggest I am indeed, and it's in a very distinctive British accent, which everybody who overhears that in the American end loves. You know, I was with somebody the other day, and they slowly but surely were meant to be doing a little bit of business. They ended up calling the whole family over to try it out over Skype. You know, so they were talking to her in English accent over Skype. It was hilarious. But as you say, she's got a bit of attitude, that one, which the Amazon variant doesn't. But I worry more about. Microsoft's come in with their mixed reality headset thing. You've got the Oculus, which of course is connected with Facebook. You've got Daydream and all the other things Google apparently wearing. And, Amazon to me is still a little bit of a second player there when I think of the Googles, the Microsofts, the Facebooks, and Apple, of course. But at the end of the day, a lot of new things come up, VR, virtual world included, and, a bit of time passes and you suddenly realize everybody is using the ubiquitous tool, and the ubiquitous tool is owned by one of these monopolies. And you can't really get away from that whilst these monopolies are allowed to monopolize, I think. So I think that's the dystopian part of it, is that all these wonderful enablement tools we're coming up with might just end up in the hands of commercial monopolies. But that's a different thing. Let me move back to let's move back to the highlights at the end of the year, of course, because before I talk about the OSCC conference, just any other comments from you, Pathfinder, and maybe even James, on the HIE, other than the particular French section we were referring to, because you were there the whole Saturday, weren't you, Pathfinder, I believe?
Yeah. No, I think it was just wonderful to see a real focus on the international flavor of everything. I mean, because we know it, when we explore the hypergrid, and it's kind of in the background always. It's like, oh yeah, you're from this country or that country, and your native language is this or that. But again, it's always in the background. And I think what was just really special was just to see how it was it was really bringing that international flavor to the foreground. I mean, that was the whole point of it, right? And being able to allow people to present in their native language, which is always, for most people, the easiest way to be most expressive. And I think that was just the wonderful thing for me. I mean, even though half the time it was like, oh, they're speaking languages I don't understand. The ability to give people a venue where they could do that, I think, was just very, very powerful, because it's most of the time, the lingua franca is English, and that's great if it's your native tongue or if you happen to be fluent in it. But I think it was just a wonderful celebration of that international fact of the hypergrid.
James, any thoughts from you? Because you obviously were behind the camera for punching all of it.
Well, I really enjoyed it, and I did take advantage of the text translations, and I actually found the presentations extremely interesting. The variation of things that people were doing that I hadn't even heard about. I think Lear, you mentioned that also. It was a very rewarding conference.
Great. I mean, one thing I remember Thirza and I spoke about when we were kind of approaching people was, I think it worked, was to most people did use slideshows, even if they used them too much, and we went through them too quickly. But we were saying, make it as visual as possible too, because it's like music. Music and art, transcend language boundaries as a rule. So I thought, if you can, even if nobody understands the word you're saying, if you can convey something with the visuals or something, it takes on meaning. And one of the highlights actually was on the Saturday, rather than the French session on the Sunday, was Cherry Manga. Near the end of Saturday, just delivering this huge artistic explosion of things around her that spread right across the heads of 4 different regions and looked spectacular. It was a nightmare to film, of course, because even though I'd seen rehearsals, I had no idea what to expect of the full whack. And I was saying to Thirza afterwards, in fact, that ideally, we would have paired her with the musician that did the after party, so you could mix the music and the visuals. But because she didn't actually want to speak, she just wanted to stand there and do her thing. But, I think it worked visually too. I mean, because sometimes when you're seeing slides and things like that, you can put together a slight awareness of what's being said, even if you don't follow the language.
Yeah, that session was really challenged from the filming part of it, and I'm curious. Do you know that is that repeated any place? Will that section happen again somewhere?
I mean, Cherry does these things. She is an artist. She is not prone to repeating herself, to be honest. She does, but she'll do something similar. I think that gave her an opportunity to just have a bigger audience than she'd normally have, and actually, and also demonstrate the technique, by which she could actually wear something that spanned 4 entire regions. And it wasn't a VAR region; it was 4 separate regions, and she was wearing this whole exhibit, interactive, thing that was changing constantly. It was going high up into the sky and down again and wide out over the 4 regions and beyond. And other times it was just around the podium, just shrunk, went big, and changed endlessly. And it was just you could only do that in a virtual world. Come think of it, there's no parallel. Have a bigger stadium, a rock band of no place in. They can't. There's some things they would just never be able to do, So I thought it was fascinating. But let's move back to the weekend before that. The other highlight of the year, a traditional highlight of the year, really, is the Open Sim Community Conference. Now, you and I, Leah, are sort of a bit behind the scenes in terms of organising that too, along with Joyce Betancourt and a cast of thousands, really. But you were certainly there, Joey. You, in fact, took part on. It was Leah's panel you were on, I think. And we'll look at it. And you were there, Pathfinder, of course. You're on the Hypergrid panel, and I saw you present at most of that. I'll start with you, Leah. I know you're part of the back end, so to speak, but how do you think it went?
Oh, it went well. Everything was so smooth, and I had such a good time. Often people ask me, why aren't we doing individual tracks on different regions? And one of the reasons is we're a community, and we'd like to have everyone together, right, having these shared experiences and not have to pick and choose which sessions to go to. So for me, being able to see 30 or 31 sessions is just amazing in a 2-day period. And we had 6 panels too, Mal. So that was amazing. A coordination of 51 speakers. Yeah.
Yeah, it was something. I do remember earlier
about the sessions. I really have to agree on that.
Long before I was involved. Well, not that long, but how many years have I been helping now? About 3, I think. But you did have the individual tracks, and I remember getting so annoyed because there would be a track on somewhere, and I wasn't particularly interested. I'd TP aboard to another one, and it was sort of interesting, but there's got to be something that's really I want to listen to, you know. And there wouldn't. And then the next sessions would take over, and I'd have to choose between 3 tracks that I desperately wanted to see all of them, you know.
Right.
And obviously, the way we do it now, that is not a problem. I mean, you know, if something really is going to bore me to tears, I can have a quick break, you know. But I think it was an agenda full of, again, you know, varied, you know, stuff ranging from education through to technological development, best use cases, the works, really.
You know, I have to echo on the tracks as well, because it seems to me that having tracks in a conference is because you're in the real world and you're renting a hotel for the conference goers and the presenters, and you want to try and accomplish as much as possible. And we just don't have that limitation in virtual worlds. We can be
that, and you have
spread all over
limited physical spaces too.
Yeah,
that's a good point, James, because see, often the seating capacity, I do a lot of symposia. Remember that 246, right? And so I plan a lot of conferences, and some rooms will only hold 40 to 100 people. And when you have 500 to 19,000 people attending your venue, that's when you start thinking tracks are your friend, right? But
sure.
But when it comes to building community, having everyone together and getting exposed to content you didn't think you'd like, Mal, that's really what it's about. Is oh my gosh, that's more interesting than I thought it was.
Yeah. I think it was last year. There was a display of, you know, I knew from rehearsals it was something about shooting stuff, and I thought I can never get past the first frame of video. Shooting's just not my thing, you know. But it was actually one of the most fascinating talks, because it was really about scripting and the enablement of these tools. And you know, I was suddenly thinking, well, I don't want to use that for shooting. That would have a much better use for this, you know. So it was interesting. In ways that I wouldn't, you know, the title would have put me off, but the talk ended up being fascinating.
That's right.
Yeah.
Often many of the behaviors you see us do for games or shooting or whatever, we can actually use and repurpose for other kinds of more peaceful events. So I remember the first day as a newbie, right, showing a class how to add a little physics to an object, and then of course to move it over a meter, and it hit me, and bam, I went flying over to the next region, and I said, aha, I like it. A fast way to travel.
Yeah, and of course, being virtual, your ass wasn't too sore.
Well, exactly. I was fine with it. In fact, do it again.
Do it again. I like this. Indeed. Pathfinder, you were there for most of it. What did you think of this year's OCC? And anything take your particular fancy?
I think the you know, again, it's like a regular. It's funny how it's become just like a regular thing for me now. You know, it started as like, wow, this is, you know, community conference in OpenSim, and now it's like.
It's boring.
No. It's not that. No, I'm trying to articulate something here. I guess it's that when things become kind of commonplace, they're still exciting. Like, I'm thrilled for it, you know. But at the same time, I was excited. It's going to sound weird, but like I was excited that it had become commonplace. Right, because it's like this happens every year. I expect it. I look forward to it. I put it in my calendar a year in advance, you know, and I really like that it's become established like that. I mean, that's really, I think, a real milestone for me. The same way, like when, you know, way back in the old days, you know, with the Second Life community conference, like it became a regular thing for as long as it ran, and I've really enjoyed that. You know, so it's a transition point. You know, it's no longer like, ooh, we're doing this new thing, community conference in OpenSim. It's like, no, this is a regular thing, and I tell people about it a year in advance. I'm like, wait until, you know. There's going to be this. Yeah, wait until next year's, and we'll do this thing for next year. So I think the main thing for me is just that it feels so regular now that that's very exciting to me, because that means we've established ourselves. It's not just a flash in the pan. It's not like, we're going to do this one time and then it'll go away.
It's become. I hate this word actually, but it's become an institution.
Yeah.
For want of a better word. But I mean, the beauty of
It's
the beauty of these things is that they renew themselves all the while. I mean, I think the worst aspect of institutional events is when they are year on, same in, same out. Whereas this, partly because of the venue, which is 3D online, but also, it's always reflecting change. There's sometimes you go from one year to another and you don't think anything's that much different. But when you go from 2 years or 3, then you suddenly think, oh, things have come a long way since we were talking 3 years ago, so that vitalistic, as it were, component is still there.
And one thing, though, that a few people mentioned to me was about the core developers at this conference, that it seemed like they weren't as involved in Open Simulator as they had been in the past. And I think part of that is the monetary consideration. I mean, a lot of folks are realizing that, you have to make a living and you have to pay the bills. And a lot of people expect Open Sim to just kind of be done for free.
And isn't this the endless problem? Because we discussed this on the show here endless times. It's open source, it's everything else, and they've always been very, a lot of the core devs have almost been precious about not having a boss and not being employed by anybody, or even having a roadmap, because they think, they work on their little thing, then they contribute it to core. And I've actually heard of instances where people wanted to pay for certain things to be done, and core developers didn't want to be committed to doing a commercial job. It's not just that they weren't just refusing money to do it; they were also refusing the commitment of doing it adequately and finishing it. The contractual responsibility. Yet there's another flavour that is saying, oh, it does need backing. I mean, when we're talking about the viewer, a viewer optimized for OpenSim in particular, the hypergrid in particular, you're talking about something that it would need an awful lot of people working on voluntary to do it, and it would probably get nowhere unless there was somebody like Jessica at Firestorm, for example, who's actually coordinating about 80 different people who work on that particular viewer. They're all second lifers, so that we know where their focus is, but it's a mammoth undertaking, but at least there is somebody, and it's all volunteers, but there is somebody at the helm, and they seemingly respect her, and she manages to put it all together. Something that Justin Clark Casey did with the OpenSim developers until a couple of years ago, to a certain extent. I think core dev need to possibly amongst themselves, I don't want to sound wrong when I describe it as a clique, although it often is the same ones who are on the panel every year. James would know more on this than me because he goes to the core dev meetings when he's able to most of the year. But it seems to me that there are kind of mixed feelings, and anybody can drop in, and any aspect of this that touches on commerce seems to be kind of go down bad with them, even though they were talking at this year's panel about the need for a separate viewer, and surely they must know that a new viewer is not going to come out of nowhere without some kind of backing.
Well, I think what we need to coexist, and we need to find a way that we can have people that are developing for the platform for free, but also ones that are developing, on a paid basis. There's nothing wrong with getting paid to, create things for an open source community. That's being done in a lot of circles. And we just need to find a better way to do that, I think, so that, we can move it along, because, open source development where everybody's coming in and doing it on a voluntary basis, it has certain values to it, but it also has some negative connotations with it as well. One of the biggest things we've noticed is on the documentation side is that there aren't a lot of people that are actually adding to the documentation because they're not getting paid for it. They even brought that out in the conference this year, that, if I'm going to, put a lot of documentation in it, then I expect to get paid for it. And, it's something we need to find a happy balance on, because there are a lot of things with Open Simulator that still need to be done to bring this to a level where it's going to get mass adoption. You know, it's been an interesting tool, but it limits itself because of some of those issues.
I'm not going to mention any names, but there is somebody who is forever, he pops over here now and again, he's forever, I have long conversations on Skype with him, who is, well, in many ways a developer. And I know he works on various things, and you know, he's forever saying, you know, well, when I've got this right and absolutely right and things, then I will contribute it, you know, for free to the core, you know. But, you know, somehow I sense a sort of reluctance there, because I'm sure he's got stuff he could contribute to core at the moment. I mean, I've talked to him enough to know some of the ideas he's working on and things. Oh, God, it sounds like core could use that. But he's just unwilling to contribute it until it is complete and can be handed over as a package. Not that he wants money for the package, but, you know, he doesn't want to do something that will then get lost or neglected, or, you know, he wants to finish the package in a way that it can just be plugged in to the code. And I get the impression, you know, from him, he's only one example, of course, and I'm not naming names, but I get the impression from him that core in some ways are their own worst enemy, because it is hard to get in with them, you know, as it were, even if you've got, you know, you've got code. I don't know, there was some other example recently when the 9 series came in. Somebody contributed some code and there was a lot of furore, and I don't know how much is gossip and how much is truth. But the 09 series included a piece of code that deliberately broke somebody else's contributions, so that all the work they'd done would no longer work with OpenSim. Again, I'm mentioning no names or getting into it, but that doesn't sound good to me. You know, we want, you know, it's a community. We want to see all these people, commercial as well, but even outside the core, volunteers, you know, contributors, you know, being able to submit stuff without feeling that the elite core will block it or decide, oh, but that might be used by commerce, or that might, you know, break somebody else's bit of code that they're working on. Why can't, you know, so instead of saying, why can't we make it work for both, they go with one strand to the exclusion of another. Now, you know, I'm no expert, I can't code or whatever. This is just what I perceive from the news, and also, of course, horrendous amounts of gossip, which I very rarely report on, because you don't report gossip, you know. But I do wonder, you know, I think there has to be a solution there, but I don't know what it is. I mean, one thing that was fairly dominant in the course of this year, of course, might as well get back to the theme of this program, was the emergence of something called the IMA. Well,
you heard about the IMA recently, right?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Breakup.
I was just about to bring that up. Now, Steve Levine and a company called Our Dimension Beyond were very instrumental in helping start that up. So was the loudest voice, I guess, there, Lisa
Laxton.
Laxton, that's it. I don't know what's happened, a lot of drama or something else like that, but A Dimension Beyond have now made a very public statement of they are no longer associated with it, and they wish Lisa Laxton by name the best of luck in the future.
Yeah.
And it was a partnership between them that formed it. So all he did was he stepped down from working on that to focus on his business. But IMA still exists and still working.
But it's Lisa Laxton,
yes. And we know people like Barbara Truman, who are delightful doodle-waggle, who's sort of involved in there, and Selby Evans, of course. So
I'm on the board for IMA also, but unfortunately they always meet because of Steve's schedule. They started meeting on Wednesdays when I was teaching, and that made it a little prohibitive to attend meetings. But no, and their goal is to kind of connect between commercial subjects like you just brought up, Mal.
Yeah.
And of course, research subjects and education and e-commerce and a whole variety of subjects. And so it's kind of like a community discourse with a lot of opportunity for people to join in on committees, to work on different efforts, to come together and talk about their progress. And then they were pushing for every week having results, which is really aggressive, especially with volunteers. Yeah. And it was aggressive for me, because even though I have a finger in many pies, I have a hard time delivering on that kind of schedule. But and then they do testing of their inroads every week. So really some breathtaking stuff has come out of that. And Lisa does provide much of the heavy lifting for it because she's kind of devoted herself full time to getting that ramped up. So we really want to put a shout out to her and to Steve, because Steve was hosting the servers and everything. So I'm not sure what's happening with the servers and everything else, but I'm sure they're working all that out.
Yeah, the breakup was as of the beginning of the year. So as of tomorrow, I think it is. Yeah.
But Joey, I wouldn't phrase it as a breakup.
Well, that's the way he
release,
phrased it.
No, first he took a leave of absence for 4 months.
It's what I heard from behind the scenes, but whatever.
I know, but we're not into gossip, right? And he goes,
I'm not gossiping.
Okay, I'd like to bring this into focus. And again, I don't want to get into gossip here, but I did hear a phrase which was rather pertinent, right? And it referred to an umbrella, right? And that is what we needed, an umbrella organization, as it were, that was non-aligned, if you like, that could somehow attract and pull things together. And somebody made a remark about a particular person holding an umbrella full of holes. So that there certainly seems to be a bit of that feeling, and I know other people who were part of the IMA. I rarely go along anymore because it's always the same thing, and a certain person is always talking about the same thing, and the scope is kind of limited by the attitude and scope of the top people in it, obviously, even though it's not a commercial structure. And this really was my question, is because we need more of this cooperation. One of the great things about the last year was the formation of IMA with all this good intention. But my question really is, forgetting the individuals involved in that recent thing that we just mentioned, which has come up in the news, is it showing signs of working? Is it going in the right direction? Are we actually seeing, important things coming out of it? Now, I would say yes when I look at things like the web viewer. Cyber Lounge was there already. But certainly, Selby Evans has got his own sort of cyber lounge thing called Web Worlds, and he holds his office hours there. And that is a dominant sort of little strand there. Singer Girl, of course, has done a Web Worlds thing, which, again, uses the same principles, but doesn't have avatars. It's another kind of branch there. And the working group on that front seems to be striding ahead with some marvelous things, but also so many of these other working groups that I think supposedly exist, I'm not really hearing anything at all. And I do still get the feeds, from what's going on there. So I don't know. Do you think the IMA as an idea is a solution, or do you think it requires something even greater than that, and something that possibly really does administratively have the broad range of interest?
The IMA is a community. So that's like saying, does the community have a purpose? And the answer is yes. Does the purpose have to be so visible that every week there's a major breakthrough? I think that's unrealistic.
Oh, yeah.
I sat on the e-commerce committee, for example, and there wasn't a lot I could do actively with it, but I was very interested in their work, and they were exploring cryptocurrencies and how to come up with a common currency method, exploring the current ones that exist like Globit and others, and thinking alternatives, and thinking about these strategies. And so it causes conversations to percolate and to emerge, and people to think and to take action, or maybe not. Maybe they have to think about it for a little while. But I think that's fine. I don't think we have to rush into all of and they have a lot of committees. For those of you who are not aware, and we could give you the website so you can see more about it. It's infiniteMetaverse.com. There's many committees and projects and stuff going on. And behind the scenes, for all the committee leaders as well as the committee members, they had a Microsoft project tutorial going on, and to formalize everything. And then for those people who wanted to participate in a commercial effort, they were looking at exploring SBIRs, which are small business projects. And Joey's familiar with some of those from his past work with in one of his workplaces, Sonalists. But the notion is taking it out of the hobbyist range and thinking about, how do we make this sustainable? How do we make this productive? How could people fashion their careers and their lives in this, not just their entertainment and social, but take it to the next level? And I think that's what matters about IMA. It's not that IMA itself is important or valuable, which it is. It causes communication, community, conversation, research, and then we come together on this. And so I think that's what's very powerful about it.
Just from the sound of it, though, Lear, is I think what was the original intent for the IMA and what it's grown into now are two different things. And probably what it needs to do is the IMA needs to get more back into the roots of what the original concept was. And I think if you do that, you'll get a lot of people behind it, supporting it, because it had a good cause when it started, but just things had kind of pushed it in one direction or another over time, as often is the case.
I think I would tend to agree with Leah here, because in many respects, but it is about the conversation. I mean, there have been shows like this that I've done where we get into extended conversation, and we have, as long as it's not volatile, we cover both sides of an argument. It's a discussion, and a lot can come out of that. I know I'm always up for going into a discussion, although I will really tire of it if I go to a second discussion and find it's a repeat of the first one, because I'm about forever expanding the discussion, if you see what I mean. So I hope I'm getting the impression I'm knocking it because of the the news about the initial partners departing. But that is great. The discussion forum, and likewise the working groups. We've been seeing a lot of stuff about being able to put stuff on the web and things like that, and and at the OCC, of course, you hosted a conference about bridging worlds. A panel about bridging worlds, which is that very thing of people like Joey taking something, building an open sim, exporting it and putting it into Sciencebase, looking pretty much the same. So this bridging side of things, and likewise the e-commerce panel, which I wouldn't have followed because commerce isn't really on my agenda. But I'm not saying everybody should have a weekly report and work at the speed of light. I think the web worlds kind of thing is visible because it has made great moves very fast. Whereas the e-commerce panel is hopefully still discussing a multitude of things towards the future, but just doesn't have, a tangible result to show. For example, if a web world is talked about and comes into existence, they can show it off. But if a theory about e-commerce comes into existence, there's no immediate way to show it off until it's actually adopted, if you see what I mean. So there are limitations on what the results of a discussion can actually show.
That's right. And Mal, bridging with that thought, we've seen several efforts emerge. I mean, even Joey started one with the 3D Web Roundtable, which meets through Skype, predominantly on Sundays, but is this open forum discussion. So some ideas have to percolate like that. And I think the thing I'd like to leave you with on this thought is that the IMA was started by two people with a vision, but the vision was shared by a community, and that vision's still there. And I don't think of it as totally being dependent on the heroic efforts of an individual. Anytime that happens, you're going to see the potential for problems, because that's far too great a burden for an individual, right?
Yeah, that is possibly that is possibly the problem. Can any one individual keep a grasp on all that breadth of involvement?
But if you look at the website and you hover over the member projects, the worlds, it's kind of breathtaking how many thoughts we have out there. And yes, these are seeds that are being sown. And you're right, Joey. We're not necessarily there yet. But don't think of the IMA as an entity that fails or succeeds. Think of it as a conversation that persists somewhere within ourselves. And you're picking it up in all the things you do, not just in OpenSim or in Second Life or in Sine Wave or High Fidelity or whatever. This is evolution. And what we're looking for, let's get back on 2018, right? Where we're going in the future, we would like to see great things happen. We don't want to just have these wearable devices where we put on our headsets and our various, tactic devices and have isolated experiences. We want to have shared experiences.
Oh,
we
absolutely.
want to have community.
That's what the hypergrid OpenSim is all about, and indeed SciSpace and Fidelity and other platforms. They are worlds. They're not gated. They're not gated.
Connecting people, not disconnecting them. Yeah.
That's right. Now I love gear. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I started researching gear in '95 because I'd love to see gear. In other words, wearable devices that enable people to have better immersive experiences together, right?
Yeah.
And not isolated. And I think that's what we're starting to ask for is we don't just want to have these individual transformative experiences alone. We'd like to have them with our people.
It's another issue, and we're not going to have time to launch into that today, actually. But, I like the gear too. I always love gadgets. Most men love gadgets, I guess. But, when you have a profusion of all these different things, I was going on about monopolies earlier, but I don't see that future where there is a headset and there's jackets and there are gloves and there are all these various things. I think it's like the tools you need, the tools you use kind of thing. So I like the idea that a platform I can use 2D the traditional way without any major haptics. On the other hand, I like the idea that I can flip my hand and leap motion can make me turn left or right, like I flip a web page or a book, or a camera can maybe sense the expression on my face and translate that into marker points that animate my avatar. So things like that. But it doesn't mean I want the whole shebang. But another person, well, there'll be people who want the whole shebang, but another person's choices as to that gear might be totally different. And I like to think of the platform as being adaptable to all that. I mean, one criticism I have of High Fidelity is that unlike SciSpace, the other principal new platform I think of, is that High Fidelity seems to be on track to be the VR headset haptic thing. And I think it will probably lose traction, because their target market is more of a consumer market than an enterprise market. And I think it will lose traction over and beyond the gear obsessive people who want to be in headsets and stuff. Like I said, I had problems until I found out another way of doing it was shaking hands to make a friend, because the interface is pitched to the fact that I can shake hands, whereas in fact 9 out of 10 users you will plonk in there off the street will not be wearing anything that actually allows them to move their body.
They're becoming more desktop friendly, by the way, from what I've seen in recent days. They've also switched to the Avatar Island, recently on Hi-Fi. Just popped in there because they have a party that's going on tonight after the midnight thing. So, so I've been checking it out, and it's growing. I've looked at probably hundreds to thousands of different virtual worlds over the past decade or two. And I have to say this, don't give up hope on any of them. I mean, I'd like to see Science Space is the one that's the definite victor in all this, but I realize there's going to be many victors in different areas. And I'd say don't give up on one. You know, you never know. I mean, somebody can flip a switch and all of a sudden turn something on that suddenly makes it the place that everybody wants to be at. So
well, I'm totally absorbed here in OpenSim and the hypergrid. That is my center, as it were. But I still love coming into Science Space, and I quite enjoy popping into Hyperdeity now and again. It's not, even though I haven't got the immersive kit, you know, and the helmets and stuff like that, it is not sufficient to put me off, but it is sufficient to make me feel like this isn't my home. you know,
I understand.
It's, you know, it's a growth thing. But as you say, things evolve. I mean, I think any prospective virtual world on the horizon, when I say, you know, metaverse style communication, interoperability, you know, community, you know, I think it's very unwise for any of them to think that everybody's going to be in 3D headsets and stuff like that. I mean, the fact that they can run in those systems, great, but they, you know, you've got to think in terms of, you know, it's like people who talk 10 years to realize there was this thing called email, and then the web. You know,
well, when you look at it,
people looking at 2D screens in 20 years' time and thinking, I've heard something about these 3D things. You know, last person.
Well, when you look at it, I mean, most people are only going to spend like a half hour, 45 minutes instead of a VR headset. Yeah. And the ones that are considering virtual worlds that have VR headsets, you're probably limiting yourself to 1,000 people total, and for them to do a very short time. I mean, it's cutting edge. It's early development. I mean, I've talked to a lot of the folks there that work at Hi-Fi that, you know, stand the watches there to help people as they first come in, their community support. And some of those folks are spending 4 to 8 hours straight inside of a VR headset. Yeah. You know, obviously, if they need to do a lot of typing, they'll switch over to desktop mode. But, you know, a lot of this is, you know, where's their user base that's big enough? I mean, one of the biggest problems that Philip had was developing mass adoption when it came to Second Life. He reached a lot of people, yes, but the technology could only get up to a certain number. It wasn't fully scalable. Sure. So, you know, to be able to reach the kind of numbers that he had promised to his investors, that's where, you know, he kept trying, but it never got there. And that's what I think he's trying to do with High Fidelity, but, you know, you're not seeing those same kind of massive outreach yet. It's not reaching the level that he wants to reach yet.
Do you think, this is a straight question really, but related to this, something I think, although I can't point to facts and figures on this, except in the more general adoption sense, but, you know, those users who come in and maybe are for things, you know, one of the things Second Life suffered initially was that gamers saw no point there because there was no story, there was no game to be reached, there were no rewards. It wasn't a game, it was a user-graded platform. And Hyperdeity is in many ways very similar to a modern kind of incarnation of what Second Life was intended to be originally. But the problem is, I suspect that when it comes to casual users, the ones he's getting at the moment are coming from the gaming thing. They're the people that have actually bought all these headsets. No, there's a few people that are so into virtual worlds that they want all this kit too. And they love, you know, Philip and follow that world and they have the kit. But I think any general consumer coming into Hyperdeity with that kit will actually be coming from gaming where they...
I don't know if it's so much gaming, though, because it's Oculus and it's Vive. So it's more people that are looking at VR apps. I'm personally, the one I have is PlayStation VR, which, by the way, sold more than all the other ones combined.
Oh, yeah. Well,
but the thing is, people with PlayStation VR aren't going to be coming into High Fidelity, you know, because it's not set up for that yet. Now, there are some workarounds, but it takes more of a hack, and that's with Steam being able to use your PSVR to convert it to work in Steam so that you can go into Hi-Fi. I don't know if that's fully doable yet or not, but that's a hack that some folks have been working on.
Sure. I mean, that would certainly make sense because it's really outreach. It's the reason I do television. 9 out of 10 people could be reached, that aren't even in virtual worlds, and one of them may just click and think, "Oh, that's an interesting place to be." Let me download and see.
I think the transition we need on this eventually, Mal, is like we saw in the last decade. We saw this whole thing about what the definition of what a gamer is to people in their minds. It's the psychology of it all. So, casual gaming has really changed over the past decade. People that considered themselves gamers or game players, 10 years ago aren't the same as today. Almost everybody is using games on, their mobile phones, or they're playing it on their desktop computers or, their laptops or whatever, an iPad. Or an Android device. So the definition of what a gamer is starting to change. It's kind of like that whole thing with the adage about the frog in the pot. If you put him on the pot and it's hot, he's going to jump. But if you put him in, the water's okay, and it starts to get warm over time, he doesn't notice. Same thing's been happening with gaming. It's become part of our society, our daily life. And like Jesse Shell talks about, eventually gaming will be integrated into our lives so that we'll be doing things.
I know people, possibly including myself, that I won't commit myself. I think life is just a game anyway. It's no,
we're all just players.
The world is just a stage. But the availability of games is game-like experiences is greater, and also there's been what I would call the gamer generation, which I first encountered. I was never into it, but people who played arcades and stuff in the 70s, they, as young people, even kids, they've grown up, and these are middle-aged people now with whom the gaming scenario has been with them all their life. It's only a generation behind the idea of rock music being ubiquitous. So it's very much part of life. So I'm not knocking games, and many virtual worlds have games in them, but the platform itself is far greater than a game. It shares gaming technologies, really. Pathfinder, your thoughts on this? I noticed your avatar's nodded off, so I'll wake you up.
No, I'm still here.
Yeah, I know. No. Joking.
No, I'm still here. Well, what's I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
I think we were. Well, good point. I mean,
well, he's talking about games and the game culture,
and the extent to which we will implement, the hardware. I mean, when we look at Hyperdeity in particular, which
I mean, I think well, first of all, I mean, the only thing that will make any kind of hardware succeed is broad adoption. Broad adoption. It's got to be in people's hands, and the only thing that will make that happen is if there's a insanely compelling game to get it in people's hands. I mean, I think we need to just. There needs to be some kind of killer game to drive the crazy hardware adoption, and there's nothing new there. I mean, it's that's what drove the Xbox to where it is today. When Microsoft bought Bungie software specifically because they wanted Bungie to make Halo, which was released with the Xbox. Halo drove Xbox into everybody's hands, and so I'm waiting for Halo. I'm waiting for the Halo type game for these hardware devices. And the thing is, all these VR headsets and have all been released without Halo. And I mean Halo, the concept of Halo, a Halo type game.
They're all different platforms. So
they're all like, hey, here's this new, here's the.
Well, you had some that did it for multiple platforms. Like, for example, there's the Batman Arkham City VR that was released on a number of platforms, and it was pretty good, but it was a baby app. It wasn't a full-fledged like a Halo.
Exactly. It's a tech. What you need is you need a Halo type game.
Well, I kick it off. I wonder about that. Really, I wonder if really that killer one is what's going to take it, or is it going to take baby steps to get there? So, for example,
I think because of the I think I got to say, just because of the amount of hassle it takes to deal with putting on a headset and setting up your room for like room-based VR, like with the Vive, I think it's going to take something just so it's like, oh, this is going to be so amazing, and it's going to be so immersive.
If you look at the stores this past Christmas,
I never played games
what sold
until Myst came along, and it had to be Myst. The stores, the thing that sold was Echo devices.
Well, here, at least in the States, there were tons of stores. I'll give you like Walmart, Target, most of the major department stores. They were just lined with these VR headsets, but it was the VR headsets for like $30, $40. You know, it was basically a Google Cardboard type of one with controllers.
Yeah.
So I think what you're finding is that people, even though the technology that's coming out is very impressive, people don't want to spend all that money or make that giant of a leap yet. So it's taken us baby steps. So, I mean, like we see with a lot of these things, when we look at the way that people interact with technology, it's not just about it being the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's about people feeling it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Yeah. So how we interact and adopt to that technology, the psychology behind it.
You have a good point there, because it's not last year's news. It's like 3 years ago now, the Google Cardboard phenomenon.
Yeah.
But, you know, that is rudimentary. It's pretty awful. But, you know, it gets people used to the idea of the low entry point financially. And the magic thing, the ubiquitous thing, is something everybody's got already, which is the mobile phone to stick in it, right? It's a simple, cheap gadget that gives you a taste of baby step, if you like, of what it could be like. But you can use your phone. If you're unfortunate, of course, your phone will overheat and blow up because it doesn't like being encased.
Well, it's under your face, yeah.
Yeah. And I can't stand trying that out with the Android phone or anything like that. You know, 5-7 minutes is enough, and it's gathering dust now because I know what it's about and can't be bothered. You know, you know, if I could get into OpenSim on the Google Cardboard, that might have been a bit different. I might have given it.
I thought they had a viewer for that, didn't they?
Oh well, it's not. You know, it's not worth it. It doesn't add anything to the experience. It simply converts.
Actually, Lumia works with that for the Android.
Yeah, it converts it into like a 2-screen thing, and it. Oh, how can I explain it? It does it. It really just transposes an environment I already know in 2D into something that can be viewed in 3D, but it doesn't offer me anything more.
Okay.
It just simply. It transposes it. But in reply to, I was going to question Pathfinder on this when he says it needs this crucial game to come along, like the Halo. If it is a game, it needs to be platform agnostic, right? It can't be something that comes for Oculus and HTC and what. The chances are it needs to originate to work with PlayStation, because PlayStation, I always said, will be the winner there, because Sony PlayStation, that is ubiquitous with gaming and everything. You know,
Sony knows how to do things right too,
and they have the name, they know the branding, they you know, they could sell it on the back of PlayStation, which is huge market. So it was inevitable, you know, that they will be the winners there. But even now, though, PlayStation has its own collection of software, and the other headsets have others. There are a few that cross the thing, but are they the killer game that Pathfinder mentions? But I have another question for you both too, which is related to this. And does it need to be a game? Right? Because what we're talking about, our own passions here go far beyond the concept of a game. We're talking about communication. And the thing that revolutionized communication over past decades had nothing to do with a game. It was simply the mobile phone, and then the smartphone, and then the iPhones we have now, which are fully fledged computers. It came from wanting to extend the one communication device that everybody in the world had got used to using, which was the old handset telephone. A great cost when you wanted to talk to somebody across the world. But then suddenly that becomes something you can walk around with. And then as well as walking around with it, it gets extra features of things to do while you're walking around. And nowadays it's just a walking computer. and you're instantly in touch with anybody in the world when it comes to, say, Skype or texting and all the various apps we have. Mm. A mobile phone is not really built for running open simulator type worlds, and partly to do with the mobile. Well, the two-way bandwidth you need for immersive worlds is the issue here, because receiving wise is fairly easy on the phone, and phone calls and things are fairly easy, but depending as they do on Wi-Fi for internet connection, or even cell internet connection, the uplink required is not stable. And of course, things as small as a phone don't really come with the kind of graphics chips you need for it. But I think of, just as a whole generation has grown up with gaming, and now gaming is a part of the environment around us, that, people in middle age, it's there, it's not a kid's thing anymore. Yeah. The same has happened with mobile technology, and that is a fundamental change to everything online that didn't require being a game. So my question really is there something out there, possibly that won't be a game, but will be that thing that is cheap enough to get, easy to use, and becomes something ubiquitous that will drive this?
I know you asked Pathfinder this, but Facebook is, of course, gambling on what you just said, that the future of socialization and chat and sharing content will be something that's immersive and VR, based on this transformational experience, and the fact that Facebook's hot, but it's on a decline. The numbers are going down. Same for a lot of other popular online social technologies. So what's the new thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, for a while now, they've been asking, what's the next Facebook?
And of course, they've invested in Oculus, and they're looking at other technologies. Obviously, it has to be low cost, easy to use, comfortable, very agile, very flexible for lots of different kinds of users, for that user experience. There are a lot of different factors there. And that's why we need so many different thinkers working on it, right?
When I was reading the news earlier, there was a news item that had come up. It was, I forget the name of the company making the stuff, but basically it's a deal with a car company called Renault, or have you pronounced them? And it was about putting virtual reality in your car. Now, the built-in stuff that apparently is going to come into these Renault cars when you buy them seems to be it's sort of virtual reality, but it's probably more augmented reality. But basically, the theory is that the car industry, our mobility, and I'm not talking about mobile phones here, but our actual physical mobility, and everybody seems to have a car, whether they're a good thing or not, will have driverless cars. And, we will be bored shitless driving around, because we're no longer even driving. We'll want to have an app or do something in our car going from A to B, like we maybe do on a train where we're not driving it. So they've come up with the idea of the interior of the car being converted into a virtual environment. And some of the prototypes are actually using the windscreen part of the car as like an augmented reality, or sort of virtual reality too. The sensors on the cars that are built into the car, because it's a self-driving machine and stuff, can actually see what's ahead of you and around you. And they're adapting those sensors, right? So, to create the environment inside your car. And the best example of this is somebody's driving along, except they're not driving, right? And there's lampposts and the motorway in front of them, and they're probably going to be traveling an hour on this thing, but it's being self-driven, right? So what they're doing is they'll give you options for a virtual environment where the inside of your car may turn into outer space, and the sensors that are reading the outside of the car will interpret signposts as planets. So you'll be able to see yourself driving, being driven through space, through planets and things. And then there are other ones that are more realistic, like instead of a boring old motorway, you'd be on a virtual reconstruction of some exotic landscape, possibly a landscape that doesn't even take motor vehicles. And, the car will be fed information, that would create this environment. Now the cheap side of this is to imagine you're getting into a vehicle that's self-driving. You're going to be in it for 2.5 hours. Some people will just say, well, turn my windscreen into a cinema and let me watch a movie. But they're also, they're also tackling the people that do stuff for Renault are actually tackling the idea that you can create almost like a holodeck in the inside of the car. You'll still be stuck in your seats, so it'll be partly passive. But, what if something like that actually did, maybe we get a big take-up of self-driving cars and Tesla-type cars because, pollution, we're forced into that future. And, suddenly, like the phone, people see their car environment as like a new space to be. Like they're on the mobile phone or they're in their apartment or whatever. Cars are very important to an awful lot of people for transport and things like that. So if you can extend the entertainment system of your car, we're not necessarily talking about a game, and we're not talking about some new kind of mobile phone. We're talking about a whole new thing where you've got this device you go and sit in every day anyway, and that could become your immersive environment, whether it's augmented or fully immersive, because you don't drive it anymore. You got nothing to do with your time.
It drives you, yeah.
Yeah. So,
and especially if there are things that motivate people to use those kind of cars. So, for example, if you get certain incentives from your insurance company that if you make it driverless, that you'll save money. Yeah. Now it becomes a thing that has some financial viability with it as well.
Yeah. And the cars.
But Sebastian Thrum, he was the guy that won the DARPA challenge for the driverless car. He was a professor at Stanford, and now he's moved on to work for the X projects at Google. He has a course that he put together that actually teaches you how, I think in a period of 8 weeks, how to take common items that you can buy at local stores and turn your car into a driverless vehicle.
Gadgets, tech, gear. Yes, as you said. I love the gear. It's all the future, isn't it? Now, James is doing a number of trouble on our cameras here, but I'd like to just ask him, firstly, on the news, he normally gives a quick roundup of developer chat of the week during the year, not the last few weeks, but James, would you, you've reported on this all year, basically. Would you, do you notice any trends or possible landmarks in what's been happening with the developers on the OpenSim front? A tall question, I know.
Yeah, yeah, I can't say that I have. Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, good. I mean, I had the thought while we were discussing here that, the community of people maintaining open simulators, kind of like setting up a reception after a wedding. We can't have this person sit with that person, and we can't put this group by that group. And I guess I haven't seen anything, from just that limited perspective of the developers meeting that's going to, that looks like it's on the verge of change. The developers meeting is interesting because, there are a handful of developers there, but there are mostly people who are, users and grid owners. And I sometimes wonder if a layer of grid owners would be something that's missing between users and the developers. And I mean, users going right to the developers, I think, could just be terribly chaotic. But users asking their grid owners, we'd like our grid to be able to do this, and then the grid owners would relate that technically to the developers.
That does make perfect sense. Because if something's wrong or you want something, you probably go to the person hosting your grid.
Right.
Unless it's self-hosted, of course, but that's another ballgame.
Yeah, and I think the grid owners would be adept at using, the best way to try and get changes in OpenSim is to use the Mantis bug reporting tool. And I mean that's really the thing that the developers live by, and it's something that they can track, and they can say, I've progressed on this hasn't had any progress, rather than just more of a loose conversation. And I would think grid owners, people who are maintaining servers and the like, would be more adept at using that tool.
And from what I gather, the devs favor using things like IRC channels too,
and still,
which is oddly enough, you take the average user these days, and what's an IRC?
Right. I did that in the 80s, didn't
I? Did I? I don't know. Yeah. No, I never used IRC at all, to be honest.
But it's such a lightweight way of communicating, if you think of it that way.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the developers have full-time jobs that they're working at. And so that IRC can just be running there, and they can handle something quickly.
Sure.
And that's part of the way of working with IRC.
Now the other thing about your weekly reports, and I may have this totally wrong, but until the beginning of December, really, when we stopped doing them for this year, I was getting the impression that you were going to these and you were seeing attendance from non-core people going up a bit. In other words, other people just seem to be attending the meetings with the core developers, maybe more people than used to.
Well, I did see a spike after OSCC. I think there was, and even leading up to it a little bit. And I think, at this point with the holidays, it's kind of hard to gauge what interest and participation is, but so some of the conversations in the recent office hours were really quite in depth, and I mean really amazingly solutions focused, and there was actually a fair amount of work that came out of the office hours, which I thought was quite a nice comment on it.
Good.
Yeah.
So another year, we'll see what we come up with there. I guess.
Right.
Right. Well, I don't want to go too long. we will be a 3-hour show by the look of it. Oh no, we started late, didn't we? Let's well, let's just stay with looking at the past very briefly, and let me go around all of you one by one, and sort of just ask you what, within more or less the thread of this show, and what, but, generally, what your highlights of your year have been. What are the things you'll remember most about the 2017 year number? And I'll start with Pathfinder, if I may. That way I can just go from right to left.
I don't know.
I put you on the spot, haven't I?
It's all a blur. I guess. I mean, the big thing for me, I guess, is still it's interesting just to see, in terms of the VR space, everybody jockeying for position, but no real breakout yet. It's just still unrealized potential for serious mass adoption. And actually, well, probably the thing in that whole space that I thought the most interesting was just finally seeing Magic Leap's here's our hardware. Here are the goggles and the developer kits. That was the most interesting to me.
That was funny.
Yeah, I kept on reading blogs saying, but we don't know what we expect from Magic Leap, but this sure wasn't it. It's steampunky thing, and then of course the Windows mixed reality thing. You got the 2 hand controllers, I think.
Well, I mean, the thing was there was just so much money sloshing around.
And
to finally, here's some real hardware, not here's a photograph of some stuff we've slapped together in the lab, but here's the final production for stuff that we've got.
There's so much secrecy and everything, and yet looking at that render or photo or whatever it is, it's more like a as I announced on the news, there was actually an interview with their CEO in, I think it was Venture Beat, in the past week or so. So they are talking about what's coming. But, the secret of the company and stuff, we still don't really know that much about what's on offer. And from the kit they've shown us, it doesn't look like there's any big revolution there.
I think it's to be honest, I think it's minimalist enough that, and the fact that it is, AR gear, you're not putting a diving mask over your face and closing yourself off to the rest of the world. I think it could have some really interesting potential. But again, where's the halo that will drive people wanting to buy this light pack, thing with the light? What is it? Lightwear they call it, the goggles, and then this little pack that you have to wear that looks like a CD player. So who knows?
Yeah. It'd be interesting. That is the thing to look forward this year, when hopefully there'll be something at least on the market to judge by.
Yeah.
What about Lightwave? Is it called? Yes, Lightwave technology. The new display things they're working on that they particularly think will target VR. It's very different from our conventional pixel-based viewing technology. It's light fields. A lot of people still working on that, and even mobile phone companies promising we'll have light field displays on phones before long. Yes.
Well, I mean, that's what they're betting the whole farm on, is this new way of basically displaying images on your on your retina, making it so that you can overlap this stuff, and so it remains to be seen. I mean, I think it'll be an interesting year if this hardware really gets out there, and if there's a Halo type game that's released with it, because we saw how when AR is combined with the right type of gameplay, you have things like the Pokemon.
Yes.
Around that, and that kind of stuff could be sustainable if they have the right type of a game, and these headsets are portable enough so that you could walk down the street wearing one of these. Then
that's me. Foldable glasses in my pocket that just plug in like headphones, and I can take them on or off, or switch them, transfer to bag or whatever. I might wear that. Yeah. Okay, Leah, highlights of your year.
Well, before I do that, I love the idea of wearing some sort of sunglass or glass that is so comfortable, and you get the augmented reality or virtual reality experience, but you can also see the world around you. I think that inside out kind of perspective would be really fascinating. And I think that would be an affordance for many users, especially if it was low cost. So that's something we should put on our wish list for next year. For this year, what was important to me was, I entered so many new communities and took leadership roles in quite a few of them. So now I feel like Ben-Hur, at the chariot races, right? Running a few chariots at the same time. And as a result, I have such respect for all of these people that I had it before, but now I have such an in-depth awareness of what they go through that it's very hard for me to ever criticize, So if I've seen contemptuous today, please don't think that I am. I just find it fascinating how hard everyone works to make this possible, right? And through our communities, through our conferences, through the technology, through the software, even through stimulating ideas or thinking about the human experience. And so from this year, I think things are starting to come together for me in my head. In other words, a 24-year journey, right? And of course, so I'm looking forward to the next few years where the things Pathfinder's just mentioned, where the new Halo or the new hot game, the new thing, it could be the new Minecraft nowadays, John, because when we think about how things are appealing to different generations, younger users, and getting everyone involved, and also education, education's role in this. If we had major adoption throughout, K through 20, and now we're thinking K through 20, we no longer think K through 12. So we're thinking through the college experience and beyond. And if we start thinking about even beyond education, we think about MOOCs and people experiencing and learning without going through the formal route, right? Going through the online route and going through the virtual world route. All of a sudden, we have all these opportunities and affordances that I think could stimulate something great. But like John has mentioned, without, what's that? What were you going to say, Mel?
You answered this is the past year we're talking about. I was going to go around you again for that
fine.
next year.
But I'm a futurist.
No, but it's interesting, however, actually, that at no point until now did Minecraft come into our conversation. I think that is an interesting thing. It's not really last year. It goes back beyond that. But it's a game, but
we have
not
Minecraft VR too.
No, it's a game, but also remember, it's a game that's not a game, and it's not quite a virtual world, but it is something that captured the imagination of a huge number of people,
right?
Much more than our virtual worlds did, and I don't know how it compares with gamers who would find it very simplistic, but it captured the imagination, not just of kids because of its Lego-like quality. But, it captured, as you know, imagination with educators themselves as a wonderful educational tool. It's almost like a teasing ground for virtual worlds. So, it's not to be knocked. I mean, I don't particularly like it. I mean, it reminds me of painting science fiction book covers in the 70s where you made cities so vast that all you actually had to do was dab a dot of paint to represent a building, and then but viewed from afar you had this mammoth city, but there was no detail there. It's like pixel art, or Lego.
But if you start seeing some of the latest efforts and some of the little add-ons for it, it's really evolving. And what's interesting is for kids, it's their world, it's their sandbox, their creative side. That's the side you're talking about, not the game side where you have the risks and threats and farming and all that. But instead, you have this creative sandbox, which shares in common with what we have in the virtual world.
Exactly.
I think a big thing with Minecraft too is that you need to experience it with other people instead of all by yourself. So like I've gotten together with some of the educators that meet on the Minecraft grid that they host. And you get a lot more out of it when you're learning from each other. Whereas if you go in there and you just try to play it like a game, it's not as enticing.
Yeah, it was all about building, really.
And don't forget something very, very important. Microsoft owns Minecraft.
Oh, yes, they do now.
Think about how that ties in with Microsoft's play into the augmented reality space with, all that.
Mixed Minecraft reality, yes.
Well, and there's also the Minecraft VR version.
Yeah.
And then as we start thinking about the HoloLens and the notion of holograms, could you, and I know what you're thinking, Mal, you're thinking, but the resolution's so poor. And you're right. It's very lightweight. Well, but it appeals to kids, right?
Yeah, well, I was actually going to say that about Minecraft because it's like the kids' Lego set, but, if you've worked with graphic arts and things like that, resolution is actually everything. And
sometimes.
What in detail is low resolution in distance is actually high resolution. And I've actually seen Minecraft builds that I would not have recognized as Minecraft because they've been photographed or filmed from a vantage point where you can't see the components anymore. You're seeing the end result. Are you with me? So
that's like impressionistic painting. Yeah.
Yeah. So if there was enough pixels in the picture, you've got to zoom wildly in to find the pixels. And it's the same with Minecraft components. If you do a complex enough build, it ceases to become highly visible as a Minecraft construct.
Until you come up close to it and look at it.
Yeah, but that's the same with the high resolution.
I think part of this is a generation thing too, because a lot of the kids that I went to school with at the Art Institute, they looked at the world differently than I did, being from a different generation. It's like when I look at anime, the first thought that pops to my head is Speed Racer. But to them, it's something totally different, It's just something like they got into these low pixel variations of themselves as avatars, where they wanted to see something that was like maybe 50 pixels by 50 pixels, and they would spend hours, working it to make it look just right. It's a difference in how we view the world. It's a culture.
Sure. Interesting. Yeah.
Well, sorry, Mel.
I remember the avatars I had with where was it? Valspark, I think, in its earliest incarnation. I think I had a 1 pixel well, it was more than 1 pixel. It's like a television head and a sort of globby body. But it looked quite cute for 5 minutes. Okay, James. James, sorry, you hadn't finished there.
Well, I just wanted to bring up the notion. You asked me to talk about 2017, but I'm not the kind of person to look backwards. I take the past with me and march forward. So I'm so sorry.
Okay, no, absolutely. It was just a two-part question. It's two halves of the coin, really. James, the last year. In general, we're not talking about dev meetings and stuff now. Just highlights of the year.
I think it was a very exciting year, and I mean, for me, it capped off really nicely with the Windows mixed reality, because I'd been thinking about, I'd done the cardboard Google thing for so long, but it just really wasn't satisfying. It was difficult to get in and out of, and this Windows head-mounted display is, plug in 2 connectors, set up your space, and you're good to go, which has been pretty amazing. And then having Steam VR put into it, I think it's a very late in the year thing, but I think it's got a lot of promise for some applications. One of which is one of the things I enjoy doing is watching the news, going to visiting news locations with 360 videos in the headset is a pretty compelling experience. My other thought is that I think even though we've made so much progress, we're still so early, and I think we need a lot more of Moore's Law to keep moving forward. My Google Cardboard phone was barely up to doing some of the things that it did, and even this Windows reality headset, mixed reality headset, it still requires a lot of computer, and to have something that you can just step into and out of, like you open up a web browser. I think we're a ways from that yet.
Yeah, but who knows what the future holds.
A lot of promise.
Yeah. Sun, the last year.
You can do that, by the way, with Sciencebase in the web browser, but okay.
Oh, yeah, that is a big point too. I didn't mention it, but of course, unlike Hyper-30, Sciencebase is available in the web browser too, and even Lyra will attest to that. We talked about that at HIE when Heike was there. She went to the conference with Heike, and they popped into Sciencebase on the web to see something, and it ended up becoming the water cooler for the entire Adobe Connect conference or whatever it was.
And it was fast. I think the important part there was we only had a 10-minute break between sessions, so we would jump into SineWave, do the book fair, jump out, and be ready for the next session. And doing that every hour or two is really wild.
I love it. Virtual space is the water cooler. Well, why not? That's part of it. So last year for you, Sun.
Well, I'd say first off, overall impressions with virtual reality. I got my first VR headset that was PlayStation VR. I mean, I've got a bunch of the Google Cardboard things from before, but this is more of like a real VR headset.
Yeah.
So it got me to experience things and try things out. I finally did find one that made me motion sick. I think it might have been the frame rate between that and the gameplay wasn't that enticing for that one in particular. But most of the games that I played, I enjoyed. But also seeing changes in my work with Sciencebase, some of the things that we've been bringing. A lot of this has to do with the game industry and seeing how the game industry is changing. So some of the things in particular I've seen over this past year that have been advances forward, things like cloth physics, where your clothing moves like it does in the real world. Seeing things that where vehicles are acting more like real world vehicles. A lot of these little things are making a big difference. The other thing, though, too, is also how it loads things. So, like, for example, Second Life, when it loads, you're pretty much loading things when you come in, but then you're loading as you're moving around, and level of detail and all these other things come into play. But a lot of the worlds are based on, are a step behind the game industry because they're using older approaches to the technology. And that's why, like, for example, with Sansar, Linden Lab built its own engine, but they have to keep it up to date with the technologies that the kids are playing with, that the kids are using on games. So that's why our approach was to take it with a game engine that we'd be able to stay in step. But that also provides challenges, too, because then you have to continually make sure that you don't break things as you move forward and keep up to date with the gaming industry. So it's been an interesting one, and but we've seen all kinds of things. WebGL was a really pain in the butt with when they brought in this thing called WebAssembly technology. It was supposed to be something that was going to be, a godsend that would make it a lot faster as it converted the code, much like the conversion into JavaScript and things like that you see in some other gaming applications. But as you take it a higher level and dumbing it down to a lower level so that it runs faster natively in the browser. But it had a lot of issues because WebAssembly didn't have the maturity that it needed to have before it was massively adopted. So we've had some headaches to go through with that, as has a lot of other folks like Google that accepted it as well, and Unity did. But we're seeing a lot of changes with it as well. Like, one of the things that we recently got, and I think it's kind of a milestone, is you've probably seen with Open Simulator as well, is sometimes it's a matter of what things you have in those worlds. So, for example, one of the milestones that you have in a lot of worlds is, when does Greedy get there? So we've now not only got Greedy inside of Science Base, but we are starting to do tournament play where we have guilds. So we're kind of gamifying it so that when you come into play, it's not just about playing a game of Greedy. I mean, you can do that as well. In fact, you can buy your own table now too. But you can also, get involved in these guilds and, compete against other players, and so you have that whole social dynamics that's going with it. And you can also do it via the web player. So we've had, like, last week we had like 32 people coming in through web browser, and they were playing against each other with Greedy Inworld. So, things like that, taking this to the next level where you can get it more massive, more scalable. But what I'd also like to see, and hopefully 2018 will provide this opportunity, is we also have capabilities for things like auto sharding, similar to like what you have in World of Warcraft.
Oh, yes, Adam.
Yeah. So I'd really love to see, once we get to that kind of a scale, where whether it be a game like Greedy or it be a concert where we have, some huge rock stars that come out to perform or whatever, and, being able to automatically shard the regions and have thousands or hundreds of thousands of people show up at a live event. That would be awesome.
That would be awesome. I will agree. I will concede to use the word awesome, which I don't normally like in the modern context, but that would be awesome. That would be awesome indeed.
So it's been an interesting year with some interesting changes, but also some interesting challenges. And I think the biggest challenge that we've seen in the VR and the AR industry has been that the technology was too much for folks to swallow. It was just too big of a leap for them. So what they're doing is they're going to do incremental leaps. But what I kind of encourage folks to think about is, when it comes to virtual reality and augmented reality, if people take baby steps to get there, that's okay. They're getting there. Yeah. So, if we sold, 100,000 of these, Google Cardboard headsets in your local store, nearby, that's great, because that means people are starting to look at VR and AR more. And it's going to take a while to get there, but every step towards it is a good one.
Okay. As the only person here, really, who's also been in Hypothetic quite frequently, any past year there, any comments? I know you're not as involved there as Science Base.
Yeah. I've never really been real pleased with where it's gone personally. Right. I mean, especially like the early days when I first came in, but it's just, I mean, for me, it bugs me sometimes when things are done from an engineering perspective because they don't have the end user in mind, and I'm all about designing it for the player.
Yeah.
But I must admit, recently I've started to see some things that are coming around with hi-fi. I do appreciate the fact that they are catering more to the desktop players because the VR headsets are not going to be a large enough audience to sustain them.
Yeah.
And if you want to reach massive levels, you have to go after a wider audience base. So I do appreciate that. Also, the Avatar Island I just saw yesterday for the first time is, I think, a much better place for their entry than what they had before, where they were going from a very low poly environment to another low poly environment to another low poly environment. So it looked kind of cartoonish before, whereas now it's getting to a new level, hopefully. And I've also seen improvements when it comes to Sansar. Sansar has been doing some things that are adding a little bit more to it. They're learning the same hard lessons that VR headsets aren't a big enough audience to only cater to. They have to think about their peripheral users that are going to come in through other types of devices. Yeah. So, it's an interesting year. And I think a lot of it is what's happening is people are realizing that, you can go out and build something, but if it doesn't work for the intended audience, then you got to change things. Otherwise, it's not going to be successful.
Yeah, wonderful. I agree. Okay, so yeah, telling science there from both Sansar and Hyperdeity, I think. Right, okay. Well, when I close this show, normally I just ask everybody anything else they want to talk about and stuff, highlights of what's coming up and stuff like that. Now, my final question for everybody is another double-sided question. Firstly, I want to know what you think we can possibly expect or might just expect in the coming year, but also your New Year resolutions. And then I think we'll go at a wrap. So I'm going to start the other way around this time. I'm going to start with James. New Year resolutions and aspirations for what we might be seeing.
Wow, gracious. Well, what I hope the next year brings, one thing that I'm always hoping for is an improvement in battery life for our mobile devices. I think that's one of the key technologies that is limiting certainly development in more things that are like mobile, and certainly augmented reality headsets are going to need some good batteries if you're going to go on a trip wearing a headset. Otherwise, let's see, resolutions. Normally stay away from resolutions. I'm more kind of a person that will take things as they come. But I don't know, to stay curious, I guess, would be my resolution. I'm really I'm following the OpenSim devs, following the other virtual reality things and other technologies in general, and just keep that curiosity up.
I think I agree with that. I'm not really one for resolutions, but I think curiosity is a permanent resolution. that probably is the thing that gets me up in the morning. Right, every morning. Okay, Sun. So New Year resolutions and aspirations, what you hope we might see?
Well, in the future, I think just recently we've seen some improvements with like open world, where a lot more game companies are, instead of just doing a traditional linear game style, are going for a more open world where you can explore and do things in the order that you want to. It's also changing the way that you load the environments. And like, for example, we've been doing some stuff with Sciencebase where you do dynamic loading, where a region comes in, but it only loads like the core portion of it. And then as you start to explore in one direction or another, it will load additional areas. I think that has a lot of potential, especially for like vast open areas where you're exploring things.
Yeah.
And, kind of gets to that thing you were talking about earlier about presence, where you feel like it's a real place. Whereas if it was like kind of like Kitely has, where it's, parked and they flip the switch when you decide to go in world, it doesn't necessarily always feel like you're in a living, breathing environment. Sure. And that's where I think you're going to see some things in the upcoming year or two that will really start to push that, and you'll start to feel more of those open universes, open worlds. So that'll be exciting to see. They're already trying out some different ways, different approaches on how it loads those environments so that it feels more immersive, more interactive, and also in the approaches that it comes to building them, like on some of these games where they go to Chicago and record sound effects to really make it feel touristic to that location. Things that kind of make the mind feel much like you were talking about, like with the smell-o-vision, things that make you feel like you're really there. That really makes a big difference. The other thing too is the interface design. The simplicity of it. The less stuff on the screen, the more that you feel you're actually in the environment. So it'd be interesting to see as these things move forward in the next year, how these things develop and how people are actually using the technology. And also to see, as we go towards more of a Google Cardboard, less of a head tracking kind of thing for the massive adoption, how that affects things, how it affects it for, hopefully they'll still keep doing the things with the head tracking, the high-end versions, but also how it affects how the technology gets rolled out. As far as New Year's resolutions, I'd say the biggest thing for me is I need to get away from the computer for a bit, whether that be using a mobile device as opposed to always sitting in front of a laptop and stuff, and start exercising and doing things more, because it's easy to get sucked into the technology and to let that technology always be on your lap. And I need to move back from that a little bit too and regain a little bit of my balance in my life. That's all.
I'd go with that too a bit. I mean, my life seems to be surrounded by workstations, and the other half is lying down with an iPad. Yeah. But no, I like my long walks, so got a bit in me, yeah. Okay, Pathfinder, New Year resolutions and aspirations for our virtual future, I guess.
I don't really do resolutions that much, but I think it would. I think the idea of spending more time with people face to face is always a good aspirational goal at any point in time, given that we're all sitting in front of screens or holding screens.
It's other people, but I know what you mean. Yeah,
I think for the future, just in general, for me at least, I'm really going to keep a close eye on, like I said earlier, like what Magic Leap is doing, because they finally have this interesting hardware that conceivably could let you still interact with the physical world around you and walk down the street and still, have that face-to-face time with people, but with augmented reality glasses that don't look too burdensome. It could be really interesting if they couple that with a killer game. So that's
it's funny. I mean, apart from them, I forget who it is now. I think they're a Parisian fashion company. They've got their models in the latest kit of the season and stuff like that, and they're marketing these virtuality or augmented reality glasses to go with them, and they're a bit like the Magic Leap ones. They look like steampunk goggles. They're finally coming down in size, but something about this exotic Parisian fashion model photographed against very sophisticated backdrop, wearing these goggles. Steampunk is alive and well and living in the catwalk. We'll see indeed. Okay, the final word I think goes to Leah. Aspirations for our future in the coming year, and any New Year resolutions you might have for that matter.
Well, like the others, I don't really do resolutions. I'm usually rushing forward. So, and as a futurist, I'm always fascinated with where we're going. And for me, it's not just the next year. I always like to think 5 years from now and then 10 years from now. And of course, while 85% of what I'm projecting for 10 years from now may not come true, what interests me is the energy we put into it. So my wish is to, I think, archive and curate more of our information, spread the word, formalize, perhaps publish more, get more people involved in what we're doing, and expand our communities, start expanding our vision, create more. Those are the things that are on my wish list for me for doing over the next year, and obviously with other people.
Yeah.
I think that's about it. Like Pathfinder, I'm a gamer. The whole time we've been sitting here, I've been playing a variety of games and thinking about what it is that pulls us into a meaningful play experience. And for those of you who are not gamers, think of it in this way of thinking: is what is it that attracts you, excites you, and inflames the senses and gives you a sense of purpose, where you become the hero of the story. I think that's where the game motif becomes very powerful and very engaging, and causes us to then, be willing and fearless, to try out new things. And I think that's what we're looking for, is what is that new thing?
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. I'm glad I gave you the final word. I'm actually quite happy you don't make resolutions, because if you did have one, you'd probably have it all done in 5 minutes anyway, if I knew you. So multitasking genius that you are. Okay, well, I think that better really do us for this week. It's been a great show, looking back, looking forward, and rabbiting on as we always do. We will hopefully be back to normal with the regular show this time next week. Same time, same place next week, if all goes well. And in the meantime, I'd certainly like to wish everybody a Happy New Year. We haven't quite got there yet, but it's only an hour or so away here in the UK, so close to goal. I'd like to thank all our guests today. Firstly, James, of course, James Out Loud, who's here every week, dutifully manning the cameras and everything else. All last year, all the coming year, I hope. Thank you. And always a good conversationalist, if somewhat quieter than most. So thank you very much, James.
Oh, thank you, Mel, and Happy New Year to you.
And a Happy New Year to you too. And Sun Tzu, if I've got the second name right, or Joey Obama is probably the best. If I'm going to go for surnames, it's the Joey version. But thank you to Sun. Wonderful expertise there, and a good sort of coverage of multiple worlds in a sense, because you're all over the place. So thank you, Sun.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
That was abrupt. What did I say? Sorry. Thank you as always to John Lester, Pathfinder Lester. Mine of information too. Thank you, Path.
Oh, my pleasure.
And thank you to Leah Lobo. Another mine of information. And a very aspirational person. I always feel very driven when I'm hearing Leah speak. So thank you, Leah.
Thank you, and Happy New Year.
Yeah. Happy New Year, all of you. And that includes the audience out there and the replays, except it will be gone by the time you replay it. Right. Okay. Well, that's it, isn't it? All it needs for me to say is the usual. And is it relevant tonight? I don't know. I'm going to wish you all a very good morning, a very good afternoon, a very good evening, and indeed a good tomorrow, where if it is tomorrow, you're already in the new year. So go figure. Until next week, thank you to all my guests, and bye for now.
Cheers.